While the other students struggled with training, it was a piece of cake for our MC. Even when the older students started hunting the newcomers, our MC was the predator, the hunter. Some ran away in fear, tears in their eyes. But this little beast is actually 1,000 years old. In the past, he tried to be the strongest, even obtaining the dragon fruit, which is said to increase lifespan and make you stronger. But our MC grew old and died believing that the fruit was just a false legend. However, in a completely unexpected twist, Guileless opened his eyes once again. Confused, he wondered if he had merely fallen asleep. Everything felt strange. His room was different, his body felt light, and his surroundings unfamiliar. When he finally looked at his hands, his eyes widened in disbelief. These aren't my hands. Am I a baby? He quickly realized he was in a bizarre situation. But as a 10-star level martial artist, he questioned how anyone could have done this to him without him noticing. Then a thought struck him. The divine dragon and the golden fruit. He finally understood. The fruit's effect wasn't immortality, but reincarnation. Though unexpected, the realization filled him with joy. He had been granted another chance, a second life to reach the peak he failed to attain before. Soon he noticed he wasn't alone in the room. When he looked around, he realized he was inside the annex of the Dragon Manor. Somehow, he had been reborn into the same family. He then noticed that the room was filled with other infants. Just as he was wondering why there were so many babies here, a group of maids entered carrying baby bottles. But strangely, instead of milk, they carried a red liquid. Gilfus watched as the maids poured the crimson substance into the bottles. He thought they were about to feed the infants, but suddenly, one of the maids carried out a goblin. They forced the bottle into the goblin's mouth. Moments later, the goblin began to tremble violently. A red light burst from its body, and then it exploded into a shower of blood. Splattering across the room, Guileless froze in shock. Fear and confusion filled his mind. What in the world is happening here? One of the maids calmly said that the mixture would be safe if they adjusted the right amount of water. As they began feeding the red liquid to the other infants, another maid picked up Guileless himself. He looked at the bottle and immediately realized it wasn't milk. The energy coming from it was terrifyingly strong. He could sense that the liquid was dragon blood and that it was far too dangerous for a newborn's fragile body. But before he could react, the maid pushed the bottle into his mouth. Instinctively, like any infant, he began to drink. Instantly, immense power surged through his veins. His small body trembled from the pain, but Guileless recognized it. The blood of ancient dragons was coursing through him. He thought, this is dangerous, but maybe this is also an opportunity. At first, he considered stopping, but then he realized if he could absorb this power, he might surpass even his former self. He might finally reach the true summit of martial arts. With fierce determination, he continued drinking the dragon's blood. His veins bulged, his body convulsed in agony, but his will remained unbroken. Don't underestimate me, he thought. I am Gilfus Elragan. He repeated the words in his mind like a mantra, enduring the pain until miraculously he overcame it. The maid stared in disbelief as he continued to drink, surviving what should have been a death sentence. Within his tiny body, two colossal dragon energies clashed violently, battling for dominance. When one finally overpowered the other, Guileless could hardly believe how easily he had absorbed the power. When the two dragon forces finally merged within him, he realized this was the perfect opportunity. After finishing the last drop, he couldn't believe he had survived the overwhelming pain. His body hadn't exploded. Instead, it had adapted. He noticed a few other infants had also survived, which made him smirk inwardly. So he thought, never underestimate the survival instincts of a newborn. But as expected from a baby's body, exhaustion soon overcame him. His eyelids grew heavy, and despite his triumph, Gilfus Elragan, the strongest human reborn, slowly drifted into sleep. After 7 years, he was now undergoing intense physical training. While doing one-handed push-ups, a massive boulder was balanced on his feet. When he finally reached his 1,000th count, he kicked the boulder upward, and as it came crashing down onto his back, Gilfus couldn't believe the strength his body now possessed. contest. Guileless Loragan, the former family head of the Loragan clan, now lived under a new name, Zeke Loragan. Zeke thought about how he had achieved such physical power at a young age, realizing it was all thanks to the ancient dragon blood flowing in his veins. It was said that every being in this world possessed something called a source of power. But the ancient dragon blood that had been given to them as infants contained a tremendous amount of that power. Those who survived drinking it developed bodies far stronger than ordinary humans. With the divine dragon source of power within him, Zeke knew he had already surpassed the limits he reached at the same age in his past life. And since he was the only infant who had managed to drink an entire bottle of ancient dragon blood, his body underwent a drastic transformation, one even he did not expect. Yet despite his progress, what frustrated him most was that he remained a mere 1 star. He had trained relentlessly, expecting to reach at least 4 stars by now. The star was the measure of one's source power. In this world, the human body was said to resemble a universe. The more stars one had floating within that inner universe, the stronger they became. However, as the number of stars increased, so too did the difficulty of reaching the next level. In his past life as Gilphus Elragon, Zeke had achieved the unimaginable 10 stars. He was the only person in the world to ever reach such a level. Time really flies, Zeke muttered. He was now 7 years old. We learned that he was an illegitimate child of the current Loragan family. His mother had died when he was still an infant, and to this day, he had never even seen his father's face, something he considered deeply irresponsible. What shocked him most was the realization that 1,000 years had already passed since his reincarnation. He thought that reincarnation itself was already unbelievable, but after 1,000 years, the world had changed. It had become a true survival of the fittest era. The greatest proof of this was the practice of feeding infants the blood of ancient dragons, followed by a ritual known as the dragon trial. Only those who survived both the drinking of dragon blood and the dragon trial were deemed worthy to receive education and training as Loragan warriors. Naturally, Zeke should have been one of them. Yet whenever he asked the servant assigned to take care of him why no instructor had ever been sent to train him, the servant would only say that he wasn't allowed to answer such questions. Even after turning 7, Zeke had never received a single lesson. Isn't that strange? Zeke wondered aloud. Every child who survived the dragon trial was supposed to begin combat training. Everyone except him. Day after day, he lived alone with only a servant by his side. When he confronted the servant about it, the man merely asked what was wrong with that arrangement. Zeke sighed and said that for now, conditioning his body was more important than combat training. Anyway, after all, he could teach himself if he wanted to. He had once been a 10-star warrior in his past life. Zeke then requested information about the other surviving infants or anything about the main family that could help him, but once again, the servant refused, saying he wasn't permitted to disclose such information. Frustration clouded Zeke's face. "Will you always refuse to answer me?" he asked sharply. The servant bowed his head and repeated that he couldn't speak of such matters. "Isn't it cruel?" Zeke asked bitterly. "Treating me like this?" But the servant explained that he was only following orders, his duty being to attend to Zeke's daily needs, nothing more. The servant, a 3-star level practitioner, could have easily taught Zeke basic combat techniques. Yet Zeke had no interest in such trivial lessons. After 7 years of living with this man, he had grown used to the same lifeless responses. Finally, Zeke decided to leave and head into the forest. The servant said nothing, merely watching as Zeke walked away. "So, he's really going to let me go?" Zeke thought, a hint of irritation in his tone. Deep in the forest, Zeke uprooted wild poisonous herbs and ate them without hesitation. As before, the taste was vile, but this was part of his training method. Then, suddenly, he noticed something. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm as he repeated to himself, "Be patient, be patient." He could feel someone or something watching him from afar, observing his every move. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the presence. After a few moments, Zeke sighed. "They followed me all the way here, huh?" When he could no longer stand it, he called out, "You might as well come out if you got something to say." Then he moved into the tall grass, grass, hiding himself. Moments later, while crouched in the grass, Zeke sensed a dark, oppressive aura nearby. When he looked toward the source, he saw a creature known as an anger boar. What is that aura? He wondered. The black mist surrounding the beast was something he had never seen before, not even 1,000 years ago. As the anger boar grazed on the grass, Zeke suddenly stood and revealed himself, startling the beast. It charged at him immediately, and rather than fear, a smile formed on Zeke's face. He was genuinely thrilled to fight it. The boar lunged forward, but Zeke swiftly dodged, gathering golden energy into his fist. With a powerful strike, he unleashed an explosion that tore through the anger boar's body. He couldn't help but grin at the sight. His attack had been far stronger than he expected. Even as a 1-star, his power surpassed that of most practitioners at the same level. Hoisting the slain creature over his shoulder, Zeke muttered, "It'll be even better once I raise my star level." He was tired. Tired of 7 years of being ignored and isolated by the dragon family, he wondered if it was time to leave and travel on his own, maybe even venture toward the ocean. Meanwhile, in the distance, a cloaked man watched from the shadows. "What's going on with that boy?" he muttered. "Even without formal training, he's reached 1-star level, and he killed that anger boar with a single strike." What puzzled the man even more was how Zeke managed to sense his presence. "That child isn't ordinary," he said quietly. He recalled that Zeke's mother had died young, and his father, the current family head, had shown no interest in him. Without proper guidance, the boy shouldn't have grown this strong. Still, as the son, illegitimate or not, of the dragon head, Zeke was bound to remain under the clan's watch. That was why someone like him had been assigned to monitor the boy from the shadows. An illegitimate son, yet the blood of the family head runs through his veins, the man whispered. Could that be why he's so strong? Uncertain, he chuckled softly. That kid will be interesting to watch in the future. Then he disappeared into the darkness. Back at Zeke's home, the boy was packing his belongings, ready to set off on his journey. But suddenly he sensed several powerful presences outside, 3 4-star practitioners and 1 5-star. What are they doing here? He thought, stepping quietly to the door to listen. From their conversation, he heard them talking about how fresh and clean the air was in such a remote place, and how peaceful it was since there were no nearby rifts. Hearing this, Zeke concluded that they weren't assassins. They didn't sound like bad people at all. Deciding to confront them directly, he opened his door and asked, "What business do you have here?" The group froze in surprise. Then Zeke noticed the emblem embroidered on their clothing, the mark of the Dragon clan. "Ellen," he muttered under his breath, wondering what they wanted from him. The men quickly bowed. "It's an honor to finally meet you, young Master Zeke," their leader said. "We've been sent to escort you to the site of your examination. Zeke frowned in confusion. Annoyance flickered across his face. "They expect me to take an exam," he muttered, "even though they haven't taught me a damn thing yet." And after a few days, Zeke could hardly believe that he had returned once again to the main estate of the Dragon family. He told us that he wasn't brought here to live again within the main estate, but rather for another purpose. Before he could enter, they instructed him to change out of his dirty clothes first. Zeke then began to explain about something known as the Dragon's Nest. After 1,000 years, the Dragon family had established a school that served all branches of their bloodline. Everyone born with any relation or connection to the Dragon family dreamed of entering this so-called Dragon's Nest to receive proper education once they turned 7 years old. And today marked the day of the entrance ceremony for that academy. Zeke was here to take part in the entrance exam. Even though he hadn't learned anything about the modern generation of his family, taking the exam was mandatory. Zeke immediately felt disheartened when he realized that this was the true reason they had brought him here. Why now, he thought, when he had already decided to leave and travel the world. While sitting by the school gate, a boy from Ordiskal village approached him. It was Rangus who asked if he was all right and what seemed to be bothering him. When Zeke asked who he was, the boy formally introduced himself as Rangus and said he had approached because Zeke looked troubled. "Is that so?" Zeke replied casually. After observing the flow of energy in Rangus's body, Zeke quietly thought to himself that the boy seemed shy but had an unusually unusually strong sense of perception. Zeke then apologized for his situation, introducing himself in return and admitting that his mind was in turmoil because he had no idea what they would be required to do in the exam. "Is that all?" said Rangus, feeling slightly nervous at the mention of the test. Still, he explained that the annual entrance exam for the Dragon's Nest didn't really change much. But when Zeke admitted he knew nothing about the exam, Rangus was shocked, taking the test without any knowledge at all. Wasn't that far too reckless and dangerous? Just as Rangus was about to explain the details of the exam, a loud and arrogant voice suddenly interrupted them. A boastful boy shouted and called Rangus a weakling. Rangus turned around in shock and immediately recognized who it was. It was Retin, also from Ortiscale Village. Mocking him, Retin asked why he was here, suggesting that he must have gotten lost to end up at the Dragon's Nest. He even told him it would be better to go home before he got hurt. "I'm here to take the entrance exam," Rangus replied, though his voice trembled as Retin drew closer. Asking if he was seriously going to take the test, Retin clutched his stomach and burst out laughing, saying it was impossible for him to pass. He even insulted Rangus's father, saying, "Your father's a pseudo-dragon, right? What could the son of a pseudo-dragon possibly accomplish?" Rangus's fists trembled as he held back his anger, but Zeke noticed everything. Then it was explained to us that the Laragan family followed an absolute hierarchy. The ranks were as follows: novice whelp dragons, regular soldier child dragons, captain-level adult dragons, executive elder dragons, also known as elders, and at the very bottom were the pseudo-dragons. Those who had failed to enter or graduate from the Dragon's Nest considered immature and incomplete dragons. Yet Rangus had long dreamed of proving that even if they were called pseudo-dragons, they were still dragons. Nonetheless, Zeke was surprised and asked why Retin was so sure Rangus would fail the exam even before it started. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Retin snapped. Asking if Zeke had a problem with him, Zeke calmly said he was merely curious why Retin was so confident Rangus couldn't pass. Retin pointed at Rangus and shouted that the reason was obvious. He was just a weakling. Zeke tilted his head and asked if he really said Rangus was weak, because from what he could sense, Rangus seemed even stronger than them. Hearing that, Rangus's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the first time someone had stood up for him. The arrogant boys grew angry and asked if Zeke was seriously claiming they were weaker than a pseudo-dragon, a being they saw as inferior. But before things could escalate, a man arrived and drew everyone's attention. He was the adult dragon examiner, announcing that the Dragon's Nest entrance exam was about to begin and that all participants should register to receive their numbers. As Retin left, he glared at Zeke and warned that he wouldn't forget his face. Zeke sighed and said there was no need for anger, remarking that the children of this generation seemed to have such short tempers. Rangus quickly replied, "That wasn't that strange since they were about the same age." Rangus added that anyone would be angry if told they were weaker than him. "Is that so?" Zeke muttered lightly. Since the entrance exam was mandatory, they had no choice but to take it. Though Zeke was surprised when Rangus said it was actually possible to skip the test, Zeke's eyes widened, and Rangus realized Zeke truly didn't know anything about it. Rangus advised him that it might be better to withdraw now before he got hurt. But Zeke replied confidently that a genius like him would never withdraw from a challenge. Rangus could only shake his head and say that Zeke was overly confident despite knowing nothing about the exam. Zeke simply laughed and said that whatever the test may be, they should hurry since it was about to start. Rangus had no choice but to agree. When they arrived at the testing grounds, the examiner announced that the exam was simple. To pass, they only needed to scratch the stones placed behind him. However, no other weapons were allowed except those provided by the academy. Still, they were free to use their bare hands if they wished, but each participant only had 3 attempts. "That's it?" Zeke said, sounding unimpressed. After surviving the dragon trial when they were still infants, he expected something far more terrifying and intense, but this seemed disappointingly simple. The examiner then called the first participant and instructed him to begin. The boy, nervous but determined, struck the massive stone with all his strength. The sound of metal clashing against rock echoed loudly, ringing in their ears. But to everyone's shock, the boy's sword snapped in half, and the recoil shattered his arm. Zeke was stunned at what he saw. As the boy writhed in pain, the examiner calmly said that he still had 2 remaining attempts and asked if he wished to continue. But since the boy could no longer stand, the examiner declared him failed and ordered the others to clean up the area. As the injured participant was dragged away, the next number was called. Rangus trembled in fear at what he witnessed, while Zeke grew annoyed. "So this is what they call an exam," he muttered. He then asked what kind of stones they were using. It was explained that the stones possessed regenerative properties. Any scratches would vanish in an instant. Moreover, they could reflect physical force 100-fold when struck with power. Zeke immediately said that such materials were far too excessive for an entrance exam, but Rangus explained that it was still possible to scratch them if one could properly circulate their source power throughout their entire body before attacking. "I see," Zeke said. He realized that the circulation of source power was far more important than martial arts skills in this exam. After glancing at the other participants, he thought that only a few would be able to pass, including those arrogant boys. As the exam continued, more and more failed than passed. Many were injured badly due to the stone's ability to reflect ordinary physical attacks. Then, after a few moments, the examiner called out Zeke's number. "It's my turn," Zeke said with a calm smile. Rangus, still nervous, asked if he really had no intention of withdrawing, but Zeke simply walked forward, telling him not to worry. As he approached the examiner, the man's eyes widened in shock. Zeke's aura began to flare up, faintly revealing the might from his previous life as guileless. The examiner told him to step forward and choose a weapon, but Zeke said it wasn't necessary. His fists alone would be enough. The crowd murmured in disbelief. No matter how skilled he might be in circulating source power, they thought there was no way he could scratch the stone with his bare hands. His fists would surely shatter instead. Some of them said that not only Zeke's fists, but also his arms would be destroyed, which made Rangus extremely nervous for him. Along with his fear came anger toward himself, thinking he should have forcibly stopped Zeke to prevent him from getting hurt. The examiner then gave the signal to begin. As Zeke approached the massive stone, he placed his hand on it, noting that this was the first time he had ever seen such a material. He thought to himself that it must have been formed over 1,000 years ago, and even now there were still many things about the current generation that he didn't fully understand. But that didn't matter anymore. He immediately gathered his source power into his fist. While Rangus trembled with anxiety about what might happen to Zeke, our protagonist was actually filled with excitement because for the first time he could use his full strength. He decided to use the mysterious stone to measure his current power. Rangus's eyes widened once more as Zeke unleashed the first form of the Dragon Destruction combat technique, Burst Strike, against the stone. A tremendous surge of energy erupted from the impact. Fragments of the shattered rock flew everywhere, and the violent wind from the blast sent dust and debris swirling through the air. In awe, yet on guard, Rangus quickly shielded himself from the aftermath, while the examiner's eyes widened in disbelief at what he had just witnessed. As the dust began to settle, Zeke stood there with a smile on his face, remarking that the technique he used still seemed too much for his current strength. Despite the severe injuries to his hand, he laughed at himself, realizing he still needed much more intense training. The other participants were speechless at what they had seen. Retin looked both shocked and annoyed that Zeke had destroyed the enchanted stone. A woman watching commented that Zeke was truly interesting. While the others still couldn't get over what had happened, Zeke waited happily for the examiner to announce the results, but the examiner was still in shock. The stone Zeke had destroyed was known to regenerate itself, and the only ones capable of breaking it were supposed to be those who had already reached the 4-star level or higher. Yet now a mere child stood before him, having done what seemed impossible. "He's just an illegitimate son," the examiner muttered to himself, then wondered if Zeke's ability came from the blood of the family head that still flowed within him. He also realized that the technique Zeke used seemed strangely familiar. Still dazed, the examiner didn't respond right away, so Zeke called out to him impatiently, asking for the result. Snapping back to his senses, the examiner finally declared that Zeke had passed the test. One of the examiners then handed handed Zeke a small bottle containing a green liquid curious. Zeke asked what it was, but the man only asked if he could leave already since Zeke was blocking the area. Annoyed, Zeke frowned and muttered if everyone in this generation was this rude. Before he could complain further, Rangus ran up to him with excitement, praising Zeke's performance. Zeke proudly grinned and said it was nothing but peanuts. Zeke then asked what the liquid was, and Rangus explained that it was a healing potion, the standard potion of the Eldragon family. Healing potion? Zeke repeated. Rangus confirmed it. But since Zeke was an illegitimate son of the family, he suspected it might be poison. However, since Rangus had vouched for it, he wondered if it might actually be a spiritual medicine. The elixir known as cloud-piercing clarity wood was made from extremely rare materials, herbs found only in secret realms along with the pure source power of divine beasts and the essence of elusive phantom beasts. When used, it could heal not only fresh wounds but also old scars and injuries. On top of that, it could enhance one's source power. Because the ingredients were so rare and the process so complex, such elixirs were rarely seen. After drinking it, Zeke was amazed by its immediate effect on his body. "Is this really a spirit medicine?" he asked Rangus. Rangus replied that he didn't know what spirit medicine meant, but he was certain that the Laragan family's potions were of far higher quality than any commercial ones outside their domain. Rangus then asked if the potion's effect surprised Zeke that much. "Of course," Zeke said, explaining that it healed both his serious injuries and the strain from his training. Still, he noticed that unlike spirit medicine, it didn't seem to boost his source power. Rangus, on the other hand, said he was even more amazed by Zeke himself, to which Zeke chuckled and told him not to joke. Zeke thought to himself that the potion's existence showed how far knowledge had advanced over the last 1,000 years. Rangus praised Zeke's strength again, and Zeke declared that his dream was to become the strongest of all soon. The examiner announced that Retin had also passed the test, as well as his companions. Zeke expected as much, but then Rangus trembled nervously when his number was called. Despite his fear, he gathered his courage and walked to the front. Watching his stiff movements, Zeke wondered why Rangus was so nervous, then shouted to encourage him, telling him to trust himself. Embarrassed, Rangus asked him to lower his voice. When Rangus chose a sword as his weapon, Zeke watched closely, wondering what he was doing. Once the examiner gave the signal, Rangus attacked the stone, but as he expected, he failed on his first try. Determined, he stood again for another attempt, but his strike bounced off the stone, causing him to lose his balance and fall. His hands trembled from the stone's reflective ability. Retin and his group burst into laughter, saying it was just as they expected. The son of a pseudo-dragon was nothing more than a pseudo-dragon himself. They mocked him, telling him to give up. Retin even sneered at Zeke, asking if this was the same man he claimed could pass, and if Rangus was truly stronger than them. Zeke stayed silent for a moment, then told them to stop spouting nonsense. The examiner informed Rangus that he only had one attempt left and asked if he still wanted to continue. Rangus couldn't answer, overwhelmed by embarrassment and the ridicule of others. He lowered his head, but then Zeke walked up to him and asked what he was doing. He questioned why Rangus was using a sword instead of a spear, why he would choose a weapon that didn't suit him, and why he would take a test without any plan at all. Retin watched mockingly as Zeke told Rangus that in his current condition, he wouldn't even scratch the stone no matter how many times he tried. Retin and his group laughed again, calling Zeke an idiot, reminding him that Rangus knew nothing about using a spear. His weak father only ever taught him swordsmanship, they said, and switching weapons now wouldn't change the outcome. But Zeke ignored their jeers and called out to the examiner, asking if it was against the rules to change weapons. The examiner said it wasn't. "Then Rangus is lucky," Zeke said with a grin. He turned to Rangus and asked if he trusted him. Memories of all the humiliation he and his father had suffered flashed through Rangus's mind. Gritting his teeth, he stood tall and said he would trust Zeke. He would fight with a spear just as Zeke told him to. Rangus told us that his father never managed to enter the dragon's nest. Because of that, people called him a pseudo-dragon and laughed at him. But despite all the humiliation, his father endured everything just to raise Rangus properly. That's why Rangus swore to prove to everyone that he, Rangus, the son raised with care by his father, is also a true dragon. He stood up once more more, gripping the spear tightly in his hands, and declared that today he would prove that neither he nor his father were fake dragons. He also realized that if he tried again with a sword, the result would only be the same as before. So this time he decided to trust Zeke completely. The only problem was that he didn't know how to use a spear. Zeke called out to him, and as he pointed toward the enchanted stone, he told Rangus that there was nothing else he needed to do. Just thrust the spear straight into the stone without thinking about anything else. Just pierce it straight through, Zeke said firmly. Rangus tightened his grip on the spear. He knew that under normal circumstances, stabbing the stone directly wouldn't cause even the slightest damage, especially since it had a strong regeneration element. But Zeke was the first person to ever stand up for him, even though they had just met that very day. It was something new and unfamiliar to him, but because of that, he chose to place his full trust in Zeke and believe in his own strength. This time he gathered his source power into the spear and immediately noticed something strange. For years, he had wielded a sword, yet he had never managed to wrap it in this much source energy, something he was now effortlessly doing with the spear. With a determined shout, Rangus unleashed his full power and struck the stone with everything he had. Retin nearly died laughing, saying exactly what he had predicted, that changing weapons wouldn't help him pass the test. But Rangus didn't stop. He felt something different, something powerful. The spear in his hands felt like an extension of his own body. Then, as he drove the weapon forward with all his strength, the spear pierced through the enchanted stone completely. The shock on Retin's face and those of his companions was priceless. Even the examiners couldn't hide their astonishment, delighted by what they had just witnessed. Rangus hadn't just scratched the stone. He had pierced straight through it. Zeke immediately praised him. While Rangus himself could hardly believe what he'd done, even after the examiner officially declared that he had passed, Rangus still asked in disbelief if he had really succeeded. Zeke smiled, wrapped an arm around his shoulder, and confirmed it. Overwhelmed with joy, Rangus nearly cried as he hugged Zeke tightly, shouting over and over that he had done it, that he had passed the test. Rhet's group, however, refused to believe it. They called it luck, but Retin himself stayed silent, shaking with rage. He couldn't accept that, just as Zeke had said, Rangus was actually stronger than them, and that his result was far better. The examiner then announced that the test had officially ended. Afterward, he declared that the entrance ceremony would begin shortly. Zeke immediately asked if the test was truly over. Rangus replied that it seemed so, but added that there would probably be more tests once they entered the dragon's nest. Soon, a group of men emerged from a dark hallway. When they stepped into the light, the examiner announced that the head of the Luragan family would now deliver a speech to congratulate those who passed. The moment Zeke saw the man, he asked who the person with the cold, dark expression was. Rangus, clearly nervous, replied that it was the family head himself. "That's the family head," Zeke said. "Why does he look like that? He's not even smiling. He looks colder than ice." Rangus immediately covered Zeke's mouth, whispering that it would be best if he stayed quiet, repeating his plea for him to stop talking. Zeke nodded. When he looked again at the group, he remarked that these people represented the current power of the Luragan family. Some of them were at the 7-star level, while others were 6-star. To Zeke, their strength was impressive, especially since the current family head, Balsa Luragan, was an 8-star level powerhouse 1,000 years ago. Only a handful of people had ever reached that level. Still, Zeke wasn't sure how many existed in this current era. "I don't like this family head," Zeke muttered, but before he could say more, Rangus tried to hush him again. Zeke sighed and thought to himself that he never expected this man to be his father in this lifetime. A dark, fiery aura radiated from Balsa's body, making the entire area feel heavy. The examiner quickly ordered everyone to stay silent because Master Balsa was about to speak. When Balsa stepped forward, he uttered only a few words. They must all strive to become the flesh and blood of the Luragan family. As he spoke, the terrifying pressure of his aura spread across the hall. Zeke wasn't affected, but many of the examinees trembled in fear, some struggling to breathe as their bodies froze under the immense pressure. Zeke noticed that even Rangus was affected. He couldn't believe how easily everyone around him was overwhelmed by the family head's presence. More than that, Zeke could sense an intense hatred hidden within Balsa's aura. He didn't know the reason behind it, but even so, he couldn't bring himself to like the man who was supposedly his father. When Balsa turned away, another man stepped forward and drew everyone's attention. He had blonde hair and cheerfully thanked Balsa for his words. He then said that Master Balsa had high expectations for them all, and that just like his master, he would also keep his own speech short. As Zeke wondered who this man was, the speaker simply told everyone to train hard and grow stronger. "That's it," one of the examiners muttered. The man smiled and said that people who worry too much about small things go bald early, so he wouldn't bother with long speeches. Zeke couldn't understand what was wrong with them, but at least the atmosphere in the hall had lightened up. The examiner then announced that the new students would now be assigned to their dormitories. Everyone whose number was called had to head there immediately. Zeke asked if they wouldn't all be staying in the same dormitory, and Rangus explained that there were 4 east, west, south, and north dorms. Every student accepted into the academy was allowed to live in one of those 4 halls. When Zeke's number was called, he stood up and waved goodbye to Rangus. He was assigned to the east hall. As he walked through the corridor, he commented that a lot had changed in this place over the past 1,000 years. After finding his room, he said that he must have gotten lost since it took him a while to arrive, and his roommate had probably gotten there first. When he opened the door, he cheerfully greeted his new roommate and apologized for being late. He then said that from today on, they'd be sharing the same room, but to his surprise, his new roommate turned out to be none other than Rangus himself. Zeke couldn't help but laugh, saying it seemed like fate kept linking them together. He asked if there was anything else scheduled for the day, and Rangus confirmed that their training would start tomorrow. "Is that so?" Zeke said casually, prompting Rangus to ask if he hadn't listened to the examiner's earlier explanation. Zeke admitted that he hadn't on purpose. Rangus sighed and said they should get some rest early since training would begin the next day. As Zeke gazed out the window, he thought about his plan to escape from the Laragan family and travel the world. But after what he'd learned about the enchanted stone with regenerative properties and the healing potion, he realized he had discovered many interesting things during the exam. If he truly wanted to understand all the changes that had taken place over the past 1,000 years, he thought, then maybe staying with the Elragon family for a while wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. A month passed at the academy, and their training continued to grow harsher, holding heavy dumbbells in both hands. The instructor explained that the dragon's breath he was teaching them was one of the most important techniques ever created by the 15th Laragan family head. After reminding them that they had to master the technique under any condition, the instructor's attention was drawn to a few students. Some of them, he noticed, had already mastered dragon's breath, especially the young woman he called Master Leah. Her overflowing energy suggested that she was close to reaching the 2-star level. But aside from her, one other student caught his eye, and he could hardly believe what he was seeing. Zeke was training, while not only holding the dumbbells, but also balancing large stones on his head and arms. The instructor stared in disbelief and muttered to himself that the blood of the family head truly ran in Zeke's veins. However, it was said that no one had ever taught Zeke anything since he was a child, which is why everything he was witnessing now felt unfamiliar to him. Zeke, on the other hand, couldn't believe that the technique he once called the Dragon King's breathing technique had been further developed by the succeeding family heads, and that it was now being taught to other branches of the family as well. According to Zeke, breathing techniques were methods that gathered the source power from the surroundings into the body. Once circulated, this source power would strengthen a person's own inner energy. The effectiveness of such techniques depended on an individual's ability and intellect. That was why the great families of this world kept their techniques secret, never allowing them to be learned by outsiders or those not belonging to their bloodline. Zeke also realized that the dragon's breath was a safe and simple technique, easy enough to master, but it was useless to him if it could only be used while resting. His own version of the breathing technique allowed him to manipulate the surrounding source power even while moving. Because of that, it was far more complex and powerful in actual combat, but also much harder to learn. Only a few had ever mastered it. He thought the current generation must have simplified his original version so that even the family's branch members could learn it, and that decision had clearly helped strengthen the Dragon family. Zeke couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction. He never imagined that the techniques he had discovered long ago would still have an impact after 1,000 years. It made him wonder if the other martial arts techniques he created had also evolved over time. Interesting, he muttered to himself, amused by the thought. Leah, meanwhile, quietly observed Zeke from a distance. Later in the cafeteria, the other students were astonished by how much food Zeke was eating. As he continued devouring his meal, he noticed Rangus sitting silently across from him. "What's wrong?" Zeke asked. "You won't get strong if you don't eat." Rangus simply asked if Zeke didn't find his stamina strange. "That's it," Zeke replied. "You just need to eat more if you want to get stronger. Train harder. Push yourself." He even offered some of his food to Rangus, but the latter politely declined, saying he'd had enough. As Zeke thought about how some of the students were already well-trained even before entering the academy, a girl suddenly approached them. "You're quite impressive," Leah said, her tone calm yet confident. Zeke blinked. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked casually. Rangus immediately choked on his food, whispering nervously, "You don't know who she is? That's Master Leah, the daughter of the family head Lord Balza." "Oh," Zeke said indifferently. "What do you want me to do about that? I don't know her." Rangus began sweating profusely. "You can't talk like that. Master Leah is one of the candidates to become the next family head. She's not someone you can just speak to casually." "Is that so?" Zeke replied. "Well, I'm a family head's child too. An illegitimate one, though." Rangus froze in shock while Leah looked at him curiously. "Is that true?" she asked. "You're really the family head's illegitimate son?" The narrator's voice continued. Leah Typhon Elragan, one of the candidates to inherit the Laragan family, was now standing before Zeke herself. "Why would I lie about that?" Zeke said, shrugging. Leah frowned slightly. "Then tell me, how could an illegitimate child like you destroy the magic stone with your bare hands? How could someone not from a renowned family possess such strength?" "Because I'm Zeke," he replied confidently, turning back to Rangus. "Stop staring and finish your food." Both Leah and Rangus fell silent for a moment. Then Leah suddenly smiled. "You really are an interesting person," she said, before sitting down beside him. "How about serving under me? I'll make you one of my followers." Zeke raised an eyebrow. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "I want you to join me," she said. "Be my ally, and I'll be your backer. Every illegitimate child needs allies and influence, don't they? Use your strength to help me become the next family head. And once I do, I'll help you achieve your own dreams." Zeke didn't even hesitate. "No," he said flatly. Leah frowned again. "Why not? Don't tell me you want to become the family head yourself." As her aura flared with a faint crackling energy, Zeke could tell that she was close to reaching 2-star level. For someone her age to release an aura like that, she was indeed impressive. Still, Zeke remained calm. "You can think and do whatever you want," he said, "but I have no interest in being family head or any kind of title." "Why?" Leah asked coldly. Zeke stabbed his knife into the table. "Because I don't need to serve anyone," he said, his voice steady but sharp. "I'm the strongest person there is." The cafeteria went silent. Even Leah couldn't believe what she was feeling. Zeke's presence had completely overwhelmed her for a moment. Rangus immediately stepped in to diffuse the tension, urging both of them to calm down. But Leah wasn't the type to back off, embarrassed and angered by what just happened. She decided to challenge Zeke to a duel. Zeke, however, didn't seem to care and simply continued eating. Moments later, a commotion spread across the campus. "Where are they going?" one student asked. "To the training grounds." Another replied, "There's going to be a duel between the younger generation. Master Leah herself is fighting." "What? Master Leah from the Typhon family?" someone exclaimed. "Who's brave enough to challenge her?" When they arrived at the training grounds, everyone whispered among themselves, wondering who would face her. Zeke, meanwhile, couldn't believe Leah was actually serious about the duel. "Are you all right with this?" Rangus asked nervously. "You'll be fighting Master Leah. Even if you call her master, I don't know who she is," Zeke replied bluntly. Rangus sighed. "You should at least show some respect now that I know you're also the family head's son. Do what you want," Zeke said. Still, Rangus tried to explain. "What's important now is that you understand who you're up against. Master Leah isn't just anyone. She's the daughter of Lord Balza Laragan, and she also carries the blood of the Typhon family, one of the 4 great families supporting the Laragans. She's a prodigy who mastered all forms of the Typhina family's hereditary lightning great sword technique at a young age. Like her father's other children, she has terrifying talent." Zeke tilted his head. "I didn't understand a word of that except that she's the family head's daughter." Rangus stared at him. "How do you not know any of this? Because I don't," Zeke said plainly. "So don't ask me." Rangus blinked as Zeke suddenly laughed. "But since I don't know anything about her," he said with a grin, "that'll just make the fight more fun. Sounds exciting." Rangus could only sigh in and worry. No matter how strong Zeke was, Master Leah was on another level entirely. "Why did you even accept her challenge?" he asked. "I never run from a fight," Zeke answered, "and it looks like my challenger's ready anyway." At that moment, Leah stood with her sword planted firmly in the ground. Her aura flared, lightning crackling faintly around her. "Are you two done talking?" she asked coldly. Leah shouted, asking if they were finally done talking, and Zeke replied that he was ready. Ranges trembling in fear and shock immediately ran away from them, warning Zeke to be careful in their fight. Zeke then turned to Leah and asked why she was so determined to fight him. Leah explained that she wanted to become the next family head of the Laragan family, and to achieve that, she needed to defeat Zeke and make him one of her followers. "What do you mean by that?" Zeke asked, wondering what his connection was to her dream of becoming the family head. Leah questioned him back, asking if he truly had no idea about the current situation of their family, and whether being an illegitimate child was the reason he was so unaware. Zeke simply answered that he didn't, admitting that his knowledge about their family was limited. Because of that, Leah began explaining. She said that, including both of them, there were 5 candidates to become the next family head. Except for Zeke, all of her siblings were connected to the 4 major branch families of the Laragan clan. The position of family head was so important that it became a source of conflict among those branches. For that reason, all of Zeke's siblings had entered the Dragon's Nest to study and represent their respective families. Since the fight for succession had turned into a fierce competition, Leah needed strong allies to stand against her older brothers. Zeke quickly understood that this was a power struggle between the 4 main branches of the Laragan family. He found it all too complicated and wasn't even sure if he wanted to understand it. Leah then continued saying that as one of the candidates for family head, she needed to strengthen not only her knowledge and power, but also her influence by gathering strong followers. Without another word, she charged straight towards Zeke, declaring that she would defeat him right then and there to make him one of her subordinates. But Zeke easily dodged her powerful strike, as well as the flurry of attacks that followed. Still, Leah refused to let him escape. The onlookers couldn't believe what they were seeing. The speed of their movements was incredible. Leah's attacks, despite her heavy greatsword, flowed so smoothly and rapidly that it seemed almost effortless. As they watched the battle between the siblings, the crowd began to murmur about Leah's precise control over her source power, noting how her strikes were becoming faster and stronger over time. They could only marvel at the power of a true daughter of the family head from one of the main branches. Some even said the fight's result was already obvious. What they didn't know, however, was that Leah herself was growing increasingly frustrated. She couldn't understand how Zeke kept dodging every single one of her attacks, or why it felt like he was simply toying with her ranges. Who was watching from a distance couldn't help but be amazed, his earlier worries fading away as he saw Zeke's calm movements. Zeke then remarked that the martial arts Leah was using were unlike anything he had seen before. He admitted that her movements were far faster than those of any ordinary 1-star level fighter. But Leah, irritated, shouted for him to stop talking and focus on their fight. Zeke clenched his fist and said he was already focused, and that was exactly why he could unleash such a powerful strike so easily. His punch landed squarely, and Leah immediately gagged from the force. She fell to her knees, gripping her sword and stomach in pain. The spectators gasped and began whispering among themselves, wondering how Zeke managed to avoid all of Leah's attacks, and who this mysterious boy truly was. As Leah struggled to stand, she asked why none of her strikes could land compared to other 1-star fighters. She knew she was much faster, so logically Zeke shouldn't be able to keep up. Zeke admitted that she was indeed faster than any 1-star he had ever seen, but in his eyes, she was still just a 1-star. "You're a 1-star too," Leah snapped, saying that Zeke shouldn't be able to match her speed and movement. movements. There's a simple reason for that, Zeke replied. Your breathing, the movement of your eyes, even the shift of your muscles. I can read them all. By observing these small details, I can predict your next move. It's all based on experience. Don't make me laugh, Leah shouted, launching another fast strike toward him. But Zeke easily dodged again, saying that just like his words a moment ago, he could see and read her every move. In the next instant, he countered with another powerful attack that sent Leah crashing into the wall with a violent force. The spectators screamed in shock, asking if Leah had really been defeated. Master Zeke, that was amazing. You beat Master Leah, Rangus shouted in excitement. But Zeke calmly said that it wasn't over yet. Their fight wasn't finished. As the dust cleared, Leah stood once again, bruised but defiant. Zeke noted that she had focused her source power into her core, allowing her to endure his attack without suffering serious damage. He smiled slightly and admitted that Leah was truly an extraordinary girl. That's enough, Master Leah, Rangus pleaded. But Zeke told him to move back, warning that he could get caught in their next exchange. Zeke then noticed an intense surge of aura flowing from Leah. He wondered if she had just advanced to the 2-star level. The spectators noticed it too. They couldn't be mistaken. The glowing mark on her body was proof that she had indeed become a 2-star with a white aura. The 2-star level was a stage where one could channel source power into their martial arts, even manifesting it outside their body. As Leah thanked Zeke, saying that because of him, she had achieved the 2-star level earlier than expected. But because of that, she declared, you no longer have any chance of winning. With her aura blazing, she charged towards Zeke, her great sword surrounded by radiant power. Zeke only laughed. He looked genuinely thrilled. He said with excitement, dodging another rapid strike, you've really improved. Your speed is incredible now. But his expression suddenly changed when he felt a sting on his cheek. A shallow cut. Zeke said to himself, I know I dodged that attack. Leah smirked and asked if he could finally see the difference in their strength. She said proudly, this is my true ability. Now that I've become a full 2-star and gained my aura, I'll show you the real power of the true Thunder Great Sword technique, Zeke said, smiling in excitement. Oh, then I get to witness a martial art I've never seen before. To him, this was turning out to be the most thrilling and enjoyable moment of their fight. Leah suddenly unleashed the Lightning Greatsword technique. Lightning flash, her sword crackling with blinding golden energy as she charged forward. Zeke was instantly enveloped in a storm of lightning, forcing him to retreat a step back as he shouted, wait a second, what kind of technique was that? How can you manipulate lightning like that? Isn't this too much for a sparring match? Leah smirked, driving her sword into the ground as golden light surged around her, saying, you seem surprised. And she said calmly, summoning another move, lightning net. Sparks erupted from the earth, forming a glowing web of electricity that shot towards Zeke, but he narrowly dodged it. As he landed, he muttered to himself, her power has grown tremendously. Her strength now is nothing like before. At this rate, this fight won't be easy. The audience murmured in awe, unable to hide their astonishment. Ever since Leah had advanced to 2-star level, the tide of the battle had completely turned. Rangus, who had been watching anxiously, began to worry. Zeke noticed that Leah's movements were simple, nothing new compared to her 1-star self, but every swing of her blade now carried far greater force. Her lightning great sword technique was overflowing with power, her aura amplifying each strike. What surprised Zeke even more was the speed Leah was moving faster than he could have anticipated, and her lightning felt strangely mysterious. Still, he remained confident. Even if she could cloak herself in thunder, he was sure he could counter it. Yet curiosity filled him. What kind of power was this? What kind of lightning could she command? While evading her continuous assaults, he studied her every move, analyzing her aura and its rhythm. Leah, noticing Zeke's calm smile as he danced away from her attacks, frowned, still smiling. You look too relaxed for someone in a duel, she sneered. Let's see how long that lasts. She dashed forward once more, her sword blazing with light as she used swift thunder, enveloping herself in golden lightning. But again, Zeke evaded at the last moment. She's as fast as lightning itself, he thought, only for Leah to swing her sword mid mid-charge. The blow struck true this time, sending Zeke flying backward with a powerful shock wave that scattered dust and debris across the field. Ranges gasped and rushed toward Zeke out of sheer panic, but one of the spectators grabbed his arm to stop him. Meanwhile, Zeke stood up, his clothes scorched, but his will unshaken. Laika charged again, unleashing another lightning flash, striking him head-on. Yet Zeke still stood tall afterward. Laika muttered, her brow furrowed in disbelief. How is he still standing? Rangus ran toward them, shouting, Master Laika, stop! That's enough. We've already seen your strength. But Laika snapped back coldly, saying, Do you not understand, Rangus? Stopping mid-battle would be an insult to Zeke desperate. Rangus turned to Zeke and begged, saying, Please, Master Zeke, surrender. Laika chuckled and said, That's enough. He's right. Judging by your condition, surrendering would be wise. If you kneel and pledge loyalty to me, I'll stop. But Zeke only smiled silently. Leah's eyes hardened. Even as an illegitimate child, you're truly a proud Loragan, she said with a hint of mockery. She raised her great sword high, her aura surging, saying, If that's what you want, then I'll use my full strength to end this. Lightning roared from the heavens as Laika summoned her first secret art heaven's thunder. A colossal surge of golden energy descended, shattering the stones beneath Zeke's feet. Thunderbolts struck his body in a storm of divine fury. Rangus cried out in terror, watching his friend's body engulfed by golden lightning, smoke rising from his charred form. Laika drove her sword into the ground, exhaled deeply, and said softly, I'm sorry, Zeke, but this is the end. But then, a voice echoed through the crackling air, saying, Is that so? In an instant, a brilliant golden lightning aura exploded skyward. Laika's eyes widened in shock as she turned around. Impossible, she stammered, inquiring, How can this be? How do you have a lightning aura? Zeke stood smiling calmly as golden arcs danced across his skin, saying, So this is what you call lightning aura? He said casually. If you're asking how I got it, I honestly don't know. His tone was calm, but his words sent ripples through the crowd. Laika whispered, Impossible, unable to believe what she was seeing. Zeke smirked, saying, Truth is, I let you hit me on purpose. I wanted to study your lightning, how it flows, how it behaves, and somehow I learned to use it myself. That's absurd, Laika snapped inwardly. Zeke explained to himself that he had deliberately taken Laika's attacks because her lightning intrigued him. While enduring her strikes, he continuously activated his Dragon King's breath technique. The strange resonance between his breathing and her lightning caused golden energy to gather in his body. Before he knew it, he could manipulate the lightning himself. Maybe Laika has a unique constitution, he thought, and judging from her family's great sword technique, it's likely their whole bloodline shares this lightning affinity. Zeke walked toward her confidently. I never expected lightning-type source power to be this incredible. This duel turned out to be the perfect training. With a grin, he added, Thanks to you, Leah, I've reached 2-star level myself. Golden lightning flared around him as he declared, Our battle isn't over yet. Laika roared and charged again, her great sword glowing with power, unleashing another blinding attack. But Zeke Sidist stepped effortlessly and prepared a counter-strike. However, as he moved, he suddenly vanished in a flash and reappeared on the opposite end of the arena. He muttered, What just happened? He then realized and said, When one gains immense source power, it strengthens the body's muscles and nerves. This new lightning aura must have changed my physiology. I can't fully control my speed yet. In the stands, Rangus was speechless. He couldn't follow their movements anymore. Both fighters were blurs of golden light and thunder. He wondered, Am I just imagining things? Or has Laika not landed a single hit lately? Frustrated, Laika shouted, Are you mocking me, Zeke? Stop toying with me, Zeke replied calmly. I'm not, but I will admit you're a real threat. He then lunged forward, delivering a powerful kick, but Laika blocked it with her sword, the force pushing her backward. Zeke straightened, smirking, saying, I think it's time to end this. Leah repeated, narrowing her eyes. End this? Zeke replied. Yes, I've been thinking of creating a new technique for a while now. And this seems like the perfect time, she said in disbelief. Creating a new technique? Zeke nodded. Exactly. He paused for a moment, then murmured, should I call it a first form, or maybe a special form? Leah blinked, confused. She wondered, her thoughts spinning. Did he even receive proper combat training? From which family could he have learned that? Before she could react, Zeke appeared beside her in a flash, lightning surging in his hand. He shouted, Dragon Destruction Combat Arts, Special Form, Lightning Peak. The attack struck her directly, wrapping her in a fierce storm of golden thunder. Her body trembled violently, her sword slipping from her grasp as she fell to her knees before him, electricity still crackling around her. The arena fell silent. Rangus and the others stared in disbelief. Zeke had won. Leah, lying on the ground, exhaled shakily. After a few moments, she forced herself to sit up, trembling, she thought bitterly. I can't believe I lost. I was supposed to become the next family head. I can't lose. Not to anyone. Zeke approached her. Offering his hand, he said sincerely, You were amazing, Leah. Truly strong. It's always exciting to learn something new. This fight was worth it. Smiling warmly, he added, It'd be boring if this was the last time we fought. Let's have another sparring match sometime. Leah froze, her cheeks turning red as she stared at his outstretched hand. Despite her defeat, she had a feint of happiness on her face, perhaps out of pride, or perhaps for the first time, admiration. Once again, Zeke said that they should have another sparring match soon. With a confident smile, he added that he couldn't wait for their next bout. Leah, though a bit shy, extended her hand toward him, admitting that she was no match for him and that she willingly accepted her defeat. Meanwhile, several hours later, deep inside a dimensional rift, Bala, Elragon, the father of Leah and Zeke, and the current head of the El-Dragon family, stood surrounded by countless strange and feral monsters. As the creatures charged toward him, Balsa's eyes began to glow with an intense light, releasing a crushing wave of aura and dragon pressure. He instantly froze every creature in place, drawing his sword. Balsa invoked the first form genesis of the Dragon Destruction Combat Arts. With a single fluid swing, all the monsters around him were cleaved cleanly in half. As he sheathed his sword, the Laragan family soldiers rushed forward to finish off any remaining monsters that might have survived their master's strike. Balsa turned toward the exit of the rift, but before he could leave, one of the soldiers called out to him, saying that he had an important report. Balsa stopped walking and asked what it was about. The soldier informed him that Lady Leah had reached the 2-star level. Upon hearing this, Balsa froze mid-step. His glowing eyes flickered, and his response came out cold and detached. So what of it? The soldier, clearly nervous, explained that reaching the 2-star level at only 7 years old was an extraordinary achievement. He added that with Leah's talent, once she graduated from Dragon's Nest, she would likely reach the 4-star level, or perhaps even the 5-star level. Balsa's reply was chilling, saying, talent means nothing. The next time you report to me, I expect to hear how she can be of use to us. If all you bring are worthless updates like this, you'd better leave my sight. The soldier fell silent as Balsa continued toward the rift's exit. But before he could step through, the soldier quickly added that Leah had recently lost in a sparring match. Balsa stopped abruptly and turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. He asked, did she lose to one of her brothers? The soldier shook his head and said, no, master. She was defeated by someone her own age, by Lord Zeke. Balsa repeated, his voice low. Zeke, the son of that woman. Memories surfaced of a humble maid, Zeke's mother. That woman truly was gifted in battle, he muttered, but she died after giving birth to the boy. He turned fully to face the soldier, his tone sharp, saying, tell me who could have possibly trained Zeke to defeat a 2-star cultivator. The soldier hesitated before answering, no one, master. Lord Zeke has never received formal training. He defeated Lady Leah through his own strength and skill alone. In fact, he too has already reached the 2-star level, Balsa said flatly. I see then. Turning his back once more, he declared, begin the first trial. The soldier was visibly startled, saying, Master Balsa, forgive my intrusion, but isn't it too soon for the first trial? It's only been a month since the students began their combat training. Most of them haven't even reached the 1-star level yet. Balsa cut him off, saying, I don't care. Death chooses no time timing, no level, no favorites. Only the strong deserve to survive. Star levels mean nothing if they can't endure the first trial. Those who fail aren't worthy of the Laragan name, the soldier replied quickly. Yes, master, but then, Balza added, also, summon Freya. Tell her to return immediately. The soldier's eyes widened in disbelief, inquiring Freya. Master, do you mean that Freya? Balsa nodded, saying, indeed. If Zeke could defeat Laika using only his own strength, then he's far more intriguing than I expected. I want Freya to design and supervise the first trial herself, and I expect her to personally observe every participant. The soldier bowed deeply, saying, as you command, Master Balsa. For the first time in a long while, a faint smile appeared on Balsa's lips. A rare, almost warm expression flickered across his face as he said softly, he's the most interesting one of all. The next day at Dragon's Nest, the students continued their combat training under Rangus. Zeke, however, was off to the side, practicing his breathing technique. Sitting in a wall-sit position, he balanced a massive boulder on his head while holding dumbbells in both hands. His unwavering focus drew the attention of Rangus and the others, who couldn't help but watch him in silence. With his eyes closed, Zeke contemplated the technique they were studying, the Strike Dragon combat arts. As he recalled, this technique was originally created by the 15th family head. Though labeled as a combat art, it was in truth a body enhancement method, simple yet well constructed, allowing even young cultivators to grasp it. Ranges called out, Zeke, aren't you going to train? Zeke opened one eye, inquiring. What do you mean? Rangus clarified. I mean combat training. We're practicing the Strike Dragon combat arts, Zeke replied casually. I already learned that. Rangus was stunned, inquiring. What? But it was only taught to us this morning. How could you have mastered it already? Zeke said with a smirk. Because I'm me. But what's more important right now is that your source power is flowing incorrectly, Rangus asked, confused. My what? Zeke set down the heavy boulder from his head and told Rangus to turn around. Placing his hand on Rangus' back, Zeke channeled his aura through Rangus's body, correcting the flow of energy. He said, there, that's how your aura should circulate. Rangus turned to face him, grateful, saying, you've really mastered the Strike Dragon combat arts, haven't you? Zeke frowned playfully, saying, that's incredible. Are you doubting me? What kind of friend are you? Rangus quickly said, no, not at all. It's just aside from my father, no one's ever taught me like that before. That's why I want to learn everything I can. You, Lord Zeke, already have your own martial arts, strong enough to defeat Lady Leah. I just thought the Strike Dragon combat arts might be too simple and boring for someone like you, Zeke replied. It's not boring. Actually, I admire its stability. It reminds me of my own dragon destruction combat arts. Though my children never liked that technique, they said it was too difficult and complicated. The dragon destruction combat arts was indeed a complex and demanding technique, but it possessed immense power. It consisted of 4 main forms, and during his battle with Laika, Zeke had created a 5th. Beyond that, there was even a secret, its final form, a terrifying and destructive ability, the same one he had once used to slay the divine dragon in his past life. He wondered silently how his descendants had handled his other dragon techniques over time. Perhaps they had modified them. The thought only made him more excited. He smiled faintly, saying, anyway, since I've already mastered the Strike Dragon combat arts, I'll continue with my physical training. Everyone has their own way of learning techniques. But before he could continue, Rangus suddenly shouted his name. Zeke, please teach me. I know it's a shameless request, but I want to get stronger, even just a little. Zeke looked at him for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll teach you. Rangus blinked in surprise, inquiring, wait, you mean it? You'll really teach me? Zeke replied, of course. Why do you look so surprised? You were the one who asked, Rangus said sheepishly. I just didn't think you'd agree so easily, Zeke said. I'm not lying, and I know you're worth teaching. Just then, Leah approached them. Though hesitant, she spoke up. Zeke, I'd like you to teach me, too. Rangus turned to her, startled, inquiring, you too, Lady Leah? She asked calmly. Is there a problem? And she added, honestly, I used to think that no one my age could defeat me. As a candidate to become the next head of the Elragon family, I was confident in my power. But yesterday's match, it shattered my pride. I still don't don't know how you managed to use lightning aura, or how you wield it even better than Zeke sighed. I do, and he muttered half-jokingly. So now this is my fault, determined, Leica continued, saying, I want to become stronger, strong enough to defeat our older brothers and you as well, Zeke. Please teach me. Zeke fell silent for a moment. Deep in thought, since Zeke didn't answer right away, Leah asked if he was really fine with it. Even though he was also a candidate to become the next head of the Laragan family, Rangus agreed with her, realizing that even though Zeke was an illegitimate child, Balsa El Ragan was still his father, which technically made Zeke one of the successors. Whether he liked it or not, Zeke calmly replied that he didn't mind. But the real question was whether Leica's body was in good condition to train, saying that from what he saw in their match, her injuries would normally take at least a month to heal. Leica shook her head and said she had already used a healing potion, so there was no need for him to worry. Zeke and Rangus exchanged a look. Whispering to each other, Zeke asked if that medicine truly had such absurd effectiveness. But Rangus replied that if Zeke was referring to the basic potion given during the entrance exam, it definitely wasn't strong enough to heal Leica's wounds so quickly. Because she was the daughter of the family head, she must have used a much stronger kind of potion. Zeke sighed in amazement, muttering that this era truly was something else. Leica nodded, admitting that without the potion she would have been bedridden for at least a month. But now what mattered most was her request whether Zeke would agree to train her as well. She knew that he too needed to train, but she wanted to grow stronger under his guidance. Zeke agreed without hesitation, saying that he never turned down young people with ambition. Both Leah and Rangus were surprised by his answer. Leah pointed out that he was also young like them. While Rangus added that they were about the same age, Zeke chuckled and agreed. Then, with a teasing tone, Zeke asked if she was truly sure about having him as her instructor. After all, he was the one who defeated her. Leica replied firmly that she didn't care about that. She didn't have the luxury to be picky if she wanted to become the next head of the Laragan family. She had to become stronger, no matter what it took. Zeke remembered how during their first encounter, she had mentioned her dream of becoming family head. He asked why she seemed so obsessed with that goal. Without hesitation, Leica answered that if she failed to become family head, she would only be used for a political marriage. She spoke bitterly, saying that in the best-case scenario, she'd probably be forced to marry one of her cousins, but the worst case would be marrying a man she didn't even know. Zeke's expression darkened, anger flickering in his eyes as he asked what she meant by that. Leica said it was natural, considering how valuable the Laragan bloodline was, especially within the 4 branches of the family. Their source power was special. It could be used in countless ways. That's why the family was obsessed with keeping their bloodline pure. Rangus shuddered, sensing the terrifying aura that suddenly emanated from Zeke. His voice turned cold and sharp as he said that the Laragan family had truly begun doing disgusting things like this. He clenched his fists, saying he would destroy such filthy and meaningless traditions. But before the atmosphere could grow heavier, several instructors arrived, immediately drawing everyone's attention. Leica blinked in surprise, wondering why they had come, while Zeke muttered that the timing couldn't be worse. He worried that they might have overheard what he just said. Then, from behind them, a woman with fiery red hair appeared. One instructor stepped forward and announced that starting today, they would have a new instructor. Despite how busy this person was, she had taken the time to teach them personally, so they should be grateful. As the red-haired woman approached, she reached out her hand toward Leica and asked if she was Lady Leah. Feeling a wave of danger, Leah instinctively leaped backward. Zeke stepped forward protectively while Rangus grabbed onto his arm in fear. The red-haired woman smiled faintly, praising Leica's sharp reaction and saying her aura quality wasn't bad at all. Zeke frowned slightly. He hadn't even sensed her presence until now. Rangus nervously asked who she was. The instructor then introduced her as Lady Freya Fewick of the Black Dragon Corps. Freya gave a polite smile and greeted everyone, saying she was pleased to meet them all. She then looked straight at Zeke and asked if he was Lord Zeke. When he confirmed it, she asked if he wasn't surprised by her sudden appearance. Zeke replied calmly that nothing she did was surprising. Freya froze for a moment as Zeke's eyes began to glow faintly, and he commented that her stealth technique was rather interesting. Freya quickly realized why even the family head, Balragan, was interested in this boy. Meanwhile, Zeke analyzed analyzed her movements. He noticed her source power was concentrated in her lower body, following a flow pattern he had never seen before. That must be why her footsteps made no sound at all. A spark of excitement lit up his eyes as he wondered what kind of martial art she used. Freya then took command of the class. She confirmed that she would be their new instructor. The students began whispering among themselves in disbelief. Lady Freya, the Tempest Wind, was known as one of the strongest warriors in the family. The other instructor confirmed that Freya was a 6-star practitioner under the Black Dragon Corps, the elite unit serving directly under the family head himself. The students were in awe, unable to understand why someone of her rank would come teach at their academy. Freya smiled faintly and said she would indeed train them, but under one condition. They had to pass a simple test. The students gasped at her words. She told them not to worry. The test was simple. They just needed to bring crystal like the one she's holding and survive for 1 full month inside the poison dragon mountain. Rangus went pale at the name, while Zeke felt a sense of nostalgia. The poison dragon mountain, he explained, was home to countless poisonous creatures. Even brushing against a single leaf could kill an ordinary human instantly. It was a region of pure danger. Zeke recalled how in his previous life, he had often used that place as his personal training ground. Still, he thought this test might be too cruel for young students. Freya explained the rules. Each student would receive 1 crystal orb. If their orb broke or was lost, they would immediately be disqualified. When someone nervously asked what happened to those disqualified, Freya replied bluntly, they would be expelled from the dragon's nest. She added that they didn't need to worry about the poison itself. If they properly used the dragon's breath-breathing technique, they would be fine. As long as they held on to their orbs and controlled their breathing, they could survive. Leah pointed out that aside from poisonous plants, there were monsters there too. Freya's eyes turned sharp as she said they would need to defeat those monsters themselves, since that was the only way they could secure food. Without hunting, they wouldn't last even a few days. The students were horrified. Retin muttered that it was impossible. Many doubted whether their basic combat technique, the strike dragon, could even hurt the creatures living there. Freya smirked and told them not to panic. They had 5 days to prepare. During that time, they could each choose a basic weapon art from the Laragan family archives to learn. If they mastered it, their survival chances would improve. But if they failed to learn it within 5 days, she would not take responsibility for whatever happened in the mountain. One student asked timidly if Freya would help them in case things got too dangerous. Freya chuckled darkly, saying, "You're in the dragon's nest, the land of the Laragan family. Here, the weak do not last. Only the strong survive. If you can't defeat a few monsters on your own, then you might as well sleep peacefully beside them in the bed of poison." The students trembled in terror, sweat dripping down their faces. Rangus was on the verge of tears, while Leah stayed silent in deep thought. Zeke frowned to himself, wondering if this was still the same Laragan family he once knew. It felt so different from when he had been the family head. Freya then said that was all for now. She began distributing martial arts books for every weapon type and told them to step forward to pick whichever technique they wanted to learn. As students crowded around, Rangus hesitated, unsure what to choose. Zeke advised him to take a spear technique, reminding him that he used a spear during the entrance exam. Rangus quickly agreed and thanked him. Leah said she would pick a great sword technique since she already knew the lightning great sword's basic forms. But Zeke stopped her, suggesting she try axe arts instead. Leah asked why, and Zeke explained that it would help cover her current weaknesses. Since it was Zeke who suggested it, she didn't argue and just nodded quietly, trusting his words. Freya then asked if everyone had chosen their books. When they confirmed, she told them to make good use of the remaining 5 days. Their survival depended entirely on mastering those techniques. If they failed to do so, they would die pathetically in the poison dragon mountain. Just as she was about to leave, Freya suddenly remembered something and turned back. She warned them that during the test, their seniors would be trying to steal their crystal orbs. Rangus was stunned and asked what she meant. Freya explained that their 10-year-old senior group would also be taking the same test, but their task was to hunt down and steal the orbs from the younger younger batch. She added that the younger students outnumbered the seniors, and since the Poison Dragon Mountain was vast, they might get lucky and avoid confrontation. Still, their seniors would use everything they had to find and attack them. After saying that, Freya turned and left. Rangus looked terrified, sweat dripping down his face as he asked what they were supposed to do now. Not only did they have to deal with poisonous monsters, but also with upperclassmen hunting them. Leah frowned and said that every upper-ass man was at least 1-star level or higher. If they ganged up on her, she wouldn't last long, and most of their classmates probably wouldn't survive either. Zeke nodded, saying she had a point. If Leah couldn't fight alone, then she should form a group of 2 or 3. Cooperation wasn't forbidden after all. They could help each other hunt monsters and defend against seniors. When Rangus asked about Zeke's plan, Zeke simply said that he intended to go solo and enjoy the exam. Leah sighed and admitted that somehow that sounded just like him. Before they began training, Zeke suggested they eat first. As they walked away, Leah glanced at Rangus and asked if he didn't think Zeke was a little strange. Sometimes Rangus shrugged and replied, "Yeah, sometimes." 5 days later, the students gathered before the Poison Dragon Mountain. Their emotions mixed between fear and determination. Freya stood before them, a confident smile on her face, and declared that the weather was perfect for the test to begin. Nervously, Rangus said that the exam was finally about to begin. Even though this was Zeke's plan, he couldn't help but wonder if it was really okay for someone like him to be part of Lady Leah's team. After all, there were many noble-born students she could have chosen instead of him. Another student said, "A mere commoner who hadn't even reached 1 star yet. We're the same, Rangus." When Rangus turned around, he recognized them as Raymond and Celine, who came from the East Hall of Dragon's Nest, admitted she was also a commoner and couldn't believe she'd been chosen to join Lady Leah in the upcoming trial at Poison Dragon Mountain. Raymond, also from the East Hall, smiled as he looked at Lady Leah, but Leah quickly said that it didn't matter whether her teammates were nobles or commoners. She had chosen them because she recognized their potential and abilities. Hearing this, Rangus fell silent for a moment, then gripped his spear tightly and declared that he understood and that he would do his best not to become a burden to their group. Raymond followed, saying he would give his all to meet Leah's expectations. Leah smiled brightly and said, "I'm counting on you all." Then she turned to Zeke and asked if he was truly planning to take the trial alone. Zeke nodded confidently, saying he couldn't wait for it to begin. Celine, still nervous, admitted she admired both Zeke and Leah. While she was trembling in anxiety, Zeke was brave enough to face Poison Dragon Mountain on his own. Raymond remarked that it was natural for them to be confident since the blood of family heads flowed through their veins. But Leah quickly interjected, telling him not to compare her to Zeke because even she felt nervous. Zeke asked, "You're nervous? Is there even a reason to be nervous? Aside from you, everyone here seems like a group of promising students." However, they all replied that there were plenty of reasons to be nervous about the upcoming trial. Leah then asked Zeke if he truly thought the students she picked were skilled. Zeke immediately confirmed it and thought to himself that Leah had successfully gathered some of the most promising students in the academy. He realized that her eye for talent was indeed remarkable. He praised their group's offense and defense, saying the trial would surely be easy for them. Rangus replied with a drop of sweat running down his cheek, saying, "You're right. You've always been too confident, Zeke." Freya then asked if all the participants have arrived and soon noticed that many of the students had already formed groups. Since some weren't yet masters of their weapon arts, forming teams wasn't a bad idea. Freya then stepped forward and announced that the trial would begin shortly. She explained once again that their task was to survive for 1 full month in Poison Dragon Mountain and protect their crystal orbs. They would only pass if their orbs remained intact. Every orb was identical, meaning that if one lost theirs, it could be stolen by others. Many students grew anxious upon hearing this, while Zeke realized that this meant stealing orbs from other participants was fair game. Freya continued, saying that after the new students entered the mountain and settled, upperclassmen would also enter to steal their crystal orbs. The upperclassmen mocked them, saying that since most of the new students hadn't even reached 1 star, taking their orbs would be easy. Hearing this filled Zeke's classmates with mixed emotions, fear, excitement, and unease. Freya concluded the explanation, and as soon as she announced that the trial had officially begun, the students dashed toward Poison Dragon Mountain. Watching them go, Zeke heard Leica tell him to make sure he survived. He smiled and said he would, but that they should survive as well. Leica then called out to her team, and as Zeke told them to be careful, Freya noticed him. She said, "It's your turn to enter, Zeke," Zeke replied, apologizing for getting a bit carried away. Freya asked, "Carried away? Aren't you nervous at all?" Zeke replied with a calm smile, "No," before walking toward the mountain. Freya watched him go, thinking to herself that he was indeed a peculiar boy that night. At the camp outside Poison Dragon Mountain, one of the instructors asked Freya if the new students would be all right. When she asked what he meant, he said the trial seemed too early for beginners. Another instructor agreed, pointing out that most had only been in Dragon's Nest for a few months, that few had achieved even 1 star, and that they lacked real combat experience. He wondered how many would actually survive. Freya reassured them, saying there was no need to worry. Although the mountain was filled with poisonous creatures, most of them were only 1 or 2 starly beasts, not strong enough to pose serious danger. With a cheerful smile, she said the students would do fine. Then, under her breath, she whispered that she would eventually release that thing. When an instructor asked what she said, Freya simply smiled and replied, "Nothing." She then announced that it was time for the upperclassmen to begin their part of the trial. The older students immediately ran off toward the mountain, their eyes gleaming as they carried their weapons. Watching them leave, Freya murmured, "I wonder how many will survive. I can't wait to see the results." Meanwhile, inside the Poison Dragon Mountain, as the upper-ass men began their hunt, one of them spotted their first target. It was none other than Zeke, still standing motionless at the foot of the mountain. One said, mockingly, "The newbies entered the mountain long ago. Is this guy stupid or what?" Another raised his crossbow and prepared to shoot, but before the arrow could reach him, Zeke effortlessly caught it mid-air. As the upper-assmen stared in disbelief, Zeke snapped the arrow in half and said, "I've been waiting for you." One of them asked what he meant, but another shouted that it didn't matter. Didn't they see how he caught that arrow? Without wasting a second, Zeke dashed forward. His eyes sharp with excitement, he said with a smirk, "Now then, let's play together." In the deeper part of Poison Dragon Mountain, Celine and her group were under attack by the mountain's monsters. After Celine slew a massive frog-like creature, another one suddenly leapt from behind her. Raymond swiftly raised his shield, blocking the attack and saving Celine just in time. With a powerful swing, he bashed the monster to the ground and drove his shield straight into its body, killing it instantly. Seeing that Rangus was easily defeating his own opponent, Raymond smiled in satisfaction. Leica then praised them for their excellent teamwork, and Rangus gratefully thanked her. However, his eyes widened when he saw the mountain of slain frog monsters that Leica had single-handedly defeated. Selena, impressed, remarked that Leica's power was truly on another level, just as they had expected. Raymond agreed, saying that while they were busy fighting a few monsters, Leica had already wiped out most of them by herself. Leah simply shrugged, saying it was only natural. After all, she was a 2-star warrior, and these creatures were nothing more than a warm-up for her. She also noted that since the exam had started a week ago, everyone had improved significantly, especially Celine and Raymond, who had both reached 1-star level. Celine gratefully acknowledged Leica, saying they wouldn't have advanced so quickly without her guidance, and Raymond echoed her gratitude. Rangus, however, remained silent, quietly thinking how far he'd fallen behind now that both Celine and Raymond had achieved their first stars. Celine noticed his downcast expression and gently told him that he would surely get stronger in time and reach 1-star level too. Raymond agreed, telling him to be patient and keep working hard. Hearing their encouragement, Rangus smiled again and thanked them both. Leica then spoke, saying that Rangus had managed to defeat 3 giant frog monsters even without a star, which was truly impressive. She added that before the exam began, Rangus had trained personally with Zeke and had already perfected his spear handling, so it was only a matter of time before he became a 1-star. Moved by her faith in him, Rangus nearly teared up. As Leica looked toward the sky, she noted that night was fast approaching and told everyone they needed to head back to base. Celine agreed, warning that Poison Dragon Mountain was far too dangerous after dark. While they were on their way back, Leica suddenly stopped. Rangus immediately asked what was wrong, but Leica didn't answer. Her expression darkened as she stared ahead and demanded to know what a certain student was doing near their base. A moment later, a figure emerged from the tall grass. Rangus and the others were startled, and Celine and Raymond instinctively drew their weapons. The student stepped out with a smirk, holding his weapon loosely as he said he hadn't expected Leica to notice him so soon. Leica immediately recognized him as one of the upperclassmen and asked if he had come to steal their crystal. When he confirmed it, she realized that at last an upperclassman had decided to attack their group, and this one was a 2-star. The upperclassman grinned, saying that their current exam required them to steal the crystals from first years. Though he hadn't expected his first target to be none other than Lady Leah's group, Leica asked if he still planned to stay, even after realizing whose base he had invaded. She warned him that a single upper-ass-man wouldn't stand a chance against her team. But the upper-ass-man's grin widened as his expression turned menacing, inquiring, "Who said I was alone?" From the grass behind him emerged 3 more upperclassmen, all 1-star level. Their leader sneered, saying that even Lady Leica would have trouble fighting them since her teammates were nothing but burdens. Drawing his sword, he shouted for them to surrender and hand over their crystal orbs. He then charged at Leah with a powerful attack, but she evaded effortlessly and ordered Celine and the others to maintain their battle formation while she handled him. Meanwhile, Rangus, still without a star, struggled to defend against the attacks of his opponent. The upper-assman taunted him, saying it would be better to surrender and hand over his crystal. Rangus hesitated, unsure of what to do, until he remembered a conversation he once had with Zeke. Back then, Rangus had asked Zeke if there was any way for someone weaker like him to defeat stronger opponents. He admitted he was still starless, and worried that if stronger enemies appeared, he'd only drag his team down. Zeke's reply had shocked him, as he said, "Then you should surrender." Zeke explained that if the opponent was far stronger, 3-star or 4-star, then surrendering was the only logical choice, since a starless person could never hope to win. However, he added that if Rangus ever faced an opponent around 1-star level, there was still a chance. When Rangus asked how, Zeke simply said, "It's nothing unusual, you just have to exploit an opening." Rangus had asked, confused. "An opening?" Zeke replied. "Exactly. If you can find and exploit an opening in your opponent's defense, you can defeat them, even if they're a 2-star. When Rangus asked how he was supposed to find such an opening, Zeke's answer was simple: endure. Keep enduring until your opponent shows one. Rangus had been doubtful, but Zeke continued, saying, "There's no other way. You can't force an opening against someone stronger. You can only endure until they make a mistake. If you can't even do that, then defeating someone stronger will always be a fantasy for you," Zeke added. "If your opponent is someone special like Leica, then you won't last long. But against an ordinary 2-star, you should be fine." He then told Rangus that confidence in his own strength was crucial, and gave him one last piece of advice. Don't overthink it. Don't think about how to create an opening or the difference in power. Just wait patiently, and when it appears, thrust your spear straight into it. Now, in the midst of battle, Rangus clenched his fists as Zeke's words echoed in his mind. Since he was weaker, he had no choice but to endure every attack and wait for the right moment. The upper-assman grew more and more frustrated as Rangus continued to withstand his blows. He shouted in anger, "Just fall down already," unleashing a powerful strike. But in that instant, Rangus saw it, the opening Zeke had spoken of. Without hesitation, he gathered all his strength and thrust his spear straight into his opponent's body. The upper-assman coughed up, collapsed, losing consciousness instantly. As he fell, a radiant light glowed on Rangus's chest. The mark of his newly awakened 1-star. Leah noticed immediately, surprised yet proud that Rangus had taken down his opponent. Meanwhile, the leader of the upper-assman was in disbelief, unable to understand why Leica's power felt so overwhelming. Despite them both being 2-star level, Leica realized that, ever since mastering the axe arts technique Zeke had recommended, She had learned to channel greater force and energy into her great sword, which explained the vast difference in power. She told her opponent that it was his misfortune to have chosen her group as a target. Then, summoning golden lightning around her sword, she declared, "This battle ends here!" Her blade struck with blinding force, and the enemy leader fell unconscious. After ensuring the enemies were defeated, Leah rushed back to her team and asked if everyone was safe. Once confirmed, the group cheered in relief. They had just won their first battle against upper assmen. Celine and Raymond congratulated Rangus on reaching 1-star level, and Rangus thanked them with a bright smile. Leah looked at her team proudly, realizing that now all of her members had finally manifested their first stars. With that, she said that the next battles ahead would be much easier. Then, with a thoughtful expression, she wondered aloud how Zeke was doing. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Poison Dragon Mountain, a terrified upper assman was running for his life. Tears streamed down his face as he muttered repeatedly, "Please don't come here, Zeke, don't come here." He cursed under his breath, trembling in fear, asking himself just what kind of monster that boy named Zeke really was. Moments later, the upper assmen were running frantically, shouting for help, hoping Chapter 13 and praying that Zeke would not follow them. As Zeke dragged along one of the upper assmen he had just defeated, the others cursed in fear and confusion, asking what kind of monster or demon he was, holding the corpse of a giant snake beast in one hand. Zeke grinned and mockingly asked what their problem was, wondering aloud if no one else wanted to play with him. The upper assmen, now completely terrified, called him insane as they continued to flee. Some questioned why a lower assman like Zeke was the one hunting them down when it should be the other way around, that the upper assmen were supposed to be the hunters, not the hunted. Suddenly, one of the fleeing upper assmen tripped and fell. As he struggled to get back on his feet, he froze. The moment he lifted his head, Zeke was already standing right in front of him. With his crimson eyes faintly glowing, Zeke sighed and said he was getting tired of chasing him. He reached out his hand, offering to help the upper assman stand up, but calmly added that once he did, he would have to fight him. The upperclassman's eyes widened in pure horror before his body went limp and he collapsed unconscious on the ground. Zeke tilted his head in confusion, muttering to himself and wondering what just happened to the man. He looked around and asked out loud what was going on with the upper assmen, questioning why they had suddenly become so defensive and cowardly. Calling them pathetic, he mocked how aggressive they were the first time they saw him, only to end up running away in fear. He then smirked and shouted for the others not to leave him behind. Just then, Zeke felt a faint presence nearby. Turning toward his side, he asked whoever was watching him why they didn't come closer if they wanted a better look. When he received no reply, Zeke chuckled and said that since the observer was still watching without interfering, it must mean there was nothing wrong with what he was doing. With that, he said he would stop holding back and continue his little game with the upper assmen. From the direction where Zeke had sensed the presence, a man emerged. It was one of the overseers monitoring the examination. Beads of sweat rolled down his cheek as he whispered to himself, unable to comprehend what kind of child Zeke was. He had witnessed Zeke defeat upper assmen who were supposed to be far stronger than him, and even more astonishingly, Zeke had sensed his hidden presence. Realizing the gravity of what he had just seen, the overseer decided he had to report everything immediately. Meanwhile, at the camp outside Poison Dragon Mountain, Freya was taken aback when several observers arrived to make their report. According to them, it had been 1 week since the examination began. At present, 30% of the lower assmen had already dropped out, while the remaining ones were gradually adapting to both their environment and the dangers of Poison Dragon Mountain. One of the observers added that they did not expect many more lower assmen to withdraw from the test. When Freya asked about the upper assmen, however, the observers exchanged uneasy glances and couldn't answer her directly. Freya's expression darkened and she ordered them to speak clearly. Finally, one of them admitted that the upperclassmen were constantly fleeing. Freya frowned, momentarily lost in thought, and asked why they were running away. What exactly were they escaping from? She pointed out that to her knowledge, there were no monsters within Poison Dragon Mountain to threaten the upper assmen. One of the observers then explained that they were not running from a monster. They were running from Lord Zeke. Freya raised an eyebrow and asked why they would flee from him. The observer took a deep breath and said that Zeke had been relentlessly attacking and hunting the upperclassmen. At first, they tried to fight back, but eventually, they had no choice but to run. Another observer spoke up, asking what kind of person Lord Zeke even was. Based on what he had seen, Zeke seemed to be enjoying himself, gleefully cutting down upperclassmen and hunting them like prey. For him, it was something completely unprecedented. A second observer nodded in agreement, saying that even though Zeke was the son of the Laragan family head, he was far from normal. To them, Zeke was no longer just a prodigy. He was something beyond, a true monster in human form. Freya listened quietly, then spoke with a calm but serious tone. She admitted that she had also suspected Zeke was unusual from the very beginning. Unlike the others, he had chosen to take the exam alone and appeared completely relaxed upon entering Poison Dragon Mountain. That could only mean one thing. Zeke never planned to hide from the upperclassmen. From the very start, his intention had been to hunt them down himself, remembering the look in Zeke's eyes when they first met. Freya couldn't help but think that the boy was indeed a monster. Suddenly, one of the observers frowned, asking what that strange sound was. Freya's lips curved into a faint smile as she said that what they were hearing was something she had been waiting for. A man then approached and asked Lady Freya where they should place the massive cage they had brought. Freya told them to leave it where it was and thanked them for their work. When the observers turned to look at the cage, their eyes widened in shock. They immediately asked what kind of creature was inside, and some even questioned whether Freya truly intended to release it into the mountain, as the creature's aura alone revealed it to be at least a 3-star level beast, far too powerful for any of the students to handle. But Freya, clearly pleased, reassured them that there was nothing to worry about. Adjustments had already been made to the creature. It would only target individuals of 2-star level strength or higher. Ordinary students would not suffer serious harm. One of the observers then asked why such a creature was suddenly being released during the exam. Freya replied calmly that it was a direct order from their family head, Balza. In her mind, she wanted to witness the abilities of the boy whom their soldiers had already begun calling a monster. She wanted to see whether Zeke could survive against such a being. With that thought, she ordered that the mysterious creature be released into Poison Dragon Mountain at dawn. The next morning, deep within Poison Dragon Mountain, Rangus and his team suddenly stopped in their tracks as the ground trembled violently beneath them. Leica frowned, saying she had a bad feeling about the tremor. Raymond wondered if perhaps the upperclassmen had caused it, but Rangus shook his head, saying it was most likely the work of a beast, probably a massive anger boar. Still, Leica couldn't shake off her unease and said that something about it felt different. A moment later, a second stronger quake shook the mountain. As a giant tree began to fall toward them, Leica's instincts kicked in. She shouted for everyone to move, and the group jumped aside just in time as the enormous trunk crashed down where they had been standing seconds earlier. When they turned around, Leica froze in disbelief. Celine gasped and asked what kind of creature it was, while Rangus's face went pale and sweat dripped down his temples. In a trembling voice, he said they needed to run immediately because standing before them was a colossal golem. Meanwhile, on the other side of Poison Dragon Mountain, as Zeke sat atop a pile of monsters and upperclassmen he had defeated, he remarked that he was growing bored with the current situation of the examination. Since no more upperclassmen dared to face or challenge our protagonist, and because he could no longer sense the presence of the observers of the exam who seemed to be simply letting him do whatever he pleased, Zeke found the entire situation rather disappointing, until suddenly he sensed a presence from the opposite side of Poison Dragon Mountain, causing him to immediately question what kind of strange aura it was. At first, he thought it belonged to a 2-star level creature, but eventually he realized that the presence came from a 3-star entity. He instantly wondered if 3-star monsters were truly supposed to exist within Poison Dragon Mountain. He also questioned whether the aura he sensed belonged to an unknown being that had lived within Poison Dragon Mountain for 1,000 years. Zeke then thought that all the examinees would surely struggle against a 3-star level creature, and even Leah herself would definitely not be able to handle it. He also said that the instructors should have made sure that no 3-star level creatures existed within Poison Dragon Mountain before the examination began. But after pausing in brief contemplation, he questioned whether Freya and the other instructors had intentionally allowed a 3-star creature to remain on Poison Dragon Mountain as part of the exam. He then admitted that he had no idea what the instructors were thinking. Still, he found it perfect, because it meant he would once again have an opponent to entertain himself with. Zeke also realized that the presence he sensed was far from where he currently was, and he wondered aloud why the creature did not simply appear near his location, but he stated that he couldn't just sit and wait. And because he wished to face a 3-star level monster, Zeke declared that he would go to it and that the creature should wait for him. Meanwhile, Selene had launched an attack toward the Golem, but even with the full force of her strike, it had no effect. She couldn't believe that she failed to inflict even a scratch on the Golem's body. Raymond also charged in and struck the Golem with his shield, using all his strength. Yet, his attack was just as ineffective as Selene's. This prompted Leah to use her aura and lightning to attack. After noticing that the Golem's arm had sustained a scratch, Leah concluded that with aura, she was able to cause damage to the Golem's outer shell. In other words, only 2-star levels like her could inflict any harm, and her 1-star companions were incapable of doing so. Rangus immediately called out to Lady Leah to ask what they should do next. Leah instructed them to listen to her orders. She said that after she gained the Golem's attention, they would need to seize the opportunity to escape. However, Rangus insisted that they could not do that, nor could they abandon Lady Leah to face the Golem alone. Leah told them that they would only become burdens to her in the fight, and she ordered them to observe the Golem's arm that she had previously attacked. She added that even with her aura, all she managed was a scratch, and that as 1-star levels, they truly lacked the ability to injure the Golem. Raymond admitted that while they indeed could not injure the creature, they could still support Leah in battle, ensuring that every attack she launched would land successfully. When Leah asked what they meant, Rangus stated that he would do everything in his power not to become a burden. Selene agreed, saying that if they worked together to make sure Lady Leah's attack hit their mark, then they would surely gain a chance to win. Because of the determination and trust her companions showed her, Leah couldn't help but smile, saying she understood what they wanted. She said she would rely on them to provide support so her attacks would land. As Leah gathered her aura and lightning into her sword, Raymond prepared to defend while Rangus and Selene readied themselves for their offensive support. After Leah finished concentrating all her power into her sword, she instructed them to begin their renewed assault on the Golem. Leah quickly advanced to the front to face the Golem, but the creature immediately launched an attack toward her. Raymond used his shield to protect her, but because he was still only a 1-star level, he struggled to withstand the Golem's 3-star power. Rangus and Selene dashed forward to attack the Golem and draw its attention away. Meanwhile, Leah swiftly moved behind the Golem to deliver her strike. She unleashed her lightning greatsword technique, Heaven's Thunder, striking the Golem from behind with her full strength. A powerful explosion erupted within the forest of Poison Dragon Mountain. After Leah managed to knock down the Golem, and once the smoke had cleared, the damage she had caused to the forest was evident. Rangus immediately approached her to ask if she was all right, and Leah said she was fine, though she had used up all the source power in her entire body. She then asked how Raymond was doing. With Selene supporting him, Raymond replied that he was doing all right as well. But when Leah said that they should return to their base, she suddenly sensed the Golem's presence again behind them. She quickly shoved Rangus away, resulting in Leah being the one seized by the Golem. As the Golem held her, she couldn't believe that it was still capable of moving. She realized she had grown too complacent after her attack. Selene also couldn't believe that after being hit by Leah's full power strike, the Golem was still alive and able to move. Rangus immediately tried to save Lady Leah by attacking the Golem with his spear. but the golem swung Leah rapidly, preventing him from landing a blow. As Rangus grew increasingly concerned for Leah, a tree suddenly came hurtling toward their direction. When the tree struck the golem, it released Leah from its grip. Rangus quickly helped her stand and move away from the creature. Leah, still confused, wondered aloud what had happened and how she managed to escape the golem's hold. Then Zeke suddenly asked what kind of situation they were dealing with. Rangus and Leah immediately recognized our protagonist upon hearing his voice. But instead of checking on Leah's condition, Zeke was far too delighted by the sight of the monster. With his eyes glowing in excitement, he immediately asked what kind of clay puppet he was looking at. Just moments before the clash began, the instant he sensed the golem's presence, a faint light aura flickered in the distance. He recognized it immediately, Leah's aura. A short breath escaped him, almost a laugh of disbelief. He never expected Leah's group to be the first ones forced into a confrontation with the monster Freya had released. He accelerated without hesitation, sprinting with everything he had to reach her team before the golem overwhelmed them. While running, a bitter thought crossed his mind. In his previous life, he would have crossed this distance in an instant. Back then, nothing could have slowed him down. But now, in this weakened state, all he could do was run toward the threat with the limited strength he currently possessed. The contrast felt painfully pathetic to him, yet it only pushed him to move faster. Zeke kept running, but another thought surfaced. Leah's team consisted of promising youngsters, each one carrying the name of the Eldrian family. Even if their opponent was only a 3-star monster-type beast, he had no idea how long they would be able to withstand the assault. Reaching them quickly was the only option. Just then, something struck him. A technique he had recently learned flashed through his mind, forcing him to stop abruptly. If he already had that technique, why wasn't he using it? A faint laugh escaped him. He stepped beside a massive tree, wrapped his hands around the trunk, and tore it out of the ground with a single pull. His raw physical power, already more than twice the norm thanks to his Eldrian bloodline, surged through his muscles. Combining that strength with the new technique, he lifted the uprooted tree and hurled it with precise aim toward the golem's direction. As the enormous trunk flew across the sky, Zeke observed its arc. The technique's effect satisfied him more than he expected. The force, the accuracy, everything exceeded his initial calculations. He was glad he had chosen to learn this technique. With the agility and strength of his current body, he would definitely rely on it in the battles ahead. Zeke quietly explained the technique in his mind, the nurturing dragon's throwing art. According to him, the basic manuals had been provided to all participants in preparation for the exam. The nurturing dragon combat art, just like the strike dragon combat art, contained only simple foundational moves and straightforward instructions, but for Zeke, they were perfect. In his previous life, he had modified techniques like these far beyond their original form. He had always fought as a long-range specialist, despite having a body built for close combat. Even so, throwing a tree at the monster would never be enough to end the fight, and he knew it. He resumed running toward Leah's location. When he finally reached the team, Lingus still couldn't believe how Zeke had arrived instantly. Zeke asked whether they were unharmed. Lingus replied that they were fine, but that wasn't important. Their real problem was the monster, the golem they had been fighting. Zeke's eyes glimmered when he heard the name Golem. He murmured, "So that's what this clay puppet is called." The creature felt strange to him. He could sense its presence, yet he couldn't detect even the slightest trace of life force within it. Before he could think further, the golem rose again and immediately launched a heavy strike at him. Leah shouted a warning, urging him to be careful because the creature was extremely dangerous. The warning proved unnecessary. The golem's powerful punch came crashing toward him, but Zeke caught its fist with one hand as if it were nothing more than a light tap. He examined the creature with mild interest. He remarked, "Tough." Its hardened body made one thing clear: he would need to use aura to gradually break through its defense. With a casual swing of his arm, he pushed the golem back. Defeating something like this with normal methods would be far too boring. Leah let out a frustrated sigh after hearing his words. She complained that Zeke was always far too reckless. Lingus stood frozen, unable to believe what Zeke had just said. The golem had nearly wiped out their entire group, yet Zeke found the battle boring. The golem rose again, preparing to attack. Zeke noted that for something of its size, the creature was certainly dangerous. Even so, he raised his arm without hesitation and met its strike head-on. The collision sent a deep deep tremor through the ground, dust exploding outward from the impact. Zeke said, "This place is too dangerous." He immediately shouted for everyone to move. Leica's group didn't question him. They quickly retreated from the battlefield exactly as he ordered. Once they were far enough, Zeke gathered strength in his stance and hurled the golem with tremendous force. The massive creature crashed across the ground, tearing through the terrain. Its outer shell barely cracked, prompting Zeke to observe just how durable the thing truly was. Aura surged into his fist as he rushed after it. He wanted to know whether the inside of its body was as tough as the exterior. With one clean leap, he rose into the air above the recovering monster. He muttered, "Let's see if the inside is just as hard." He activated the first form of the Dragon Destruction combat art, Burst. His fist struck the golem, unleashing a violent explosion that tore through its body on impact. From Zeke's perspective, there was no point in dragging out the fight by slowly chipping away at the creature's defenses. Using Burst allowed him to inject source power deep into its body and destroy it from within, ending the battle instantly. Zeke confirmed that his attack had worked exactly as intended. The result thrilled him, and he admitted that fighting in this manner made the battle far more satisfying. 1 month later, Eldrian Estate, main building. Freya froze in place, clearly displeased. She scolded him sharply, insisting that he should show proper respect and address the family head as Master Head, not simply Head. Zeke argued lazily that it meant the same thing, but Freya was having none of it. In her mind, the reason for the summons was obvious. Zeke had brought this upon himself. When he asked if it was really because of his behavior, Freya confirmed it immediately. She explained that the purpose of the upperclassmen exam was for them to attack the lower-class juniors and steal their crystal ore. But instead of following the system, Zeke, a lower-class junior, had done the opposite. He had attacked the upper class. No one had expected that. Because of him, not a single upper-class student managed to steal an orb from any junior. As a result, the upper class was forced to retake the exam. Zeke countered that attacking upper-class seniors was not forbidden. Freya sighed and replied that while it was not forbidden, no junior in history had ever dared to challenge an upper class. No one ever imagined a lower-class student would have the courage or the power to do it. Freya let out a long, exhausted sigh and turned her back slightly, as if she had finally given up trying to reason with him. She told him that his careless attitude needed to be corrected immediately, especially before he met Master Blaza, the patriarch of the Eldrian family. She warned him that speaking so casually or disrespectfully in front of the family head would not be tolerated, no matter how talented he was. Freya continued speaking, saying she didn't want to witness her young lord being executed by Patriarch. She couldn't imagine Zeke dying at his father's hands because of his past behavior. Zeke only replied that if that was true, then Blisa was far more violent than he expected. He reached the door. Freya knocked immediately. As soon as the recital address left her lips, Patriarch Leah, who also served as the headmaster, introduced herself as a member of the Black Dragon Corps. Freya gave a quick wink and stated they had come in response to the Master Head's summons. Leah spoke in a heavy, dangerous tone, telling them to enter. Freya pushed the door open. They stepped inside. She promptly announced that she had brought Zeke as ordered. Leah kept writing for a moment, then lifted her gaze toward him. Her expression sharpened as she asked why he had attacked a senior upperclassman during the Poison Mountain examination. Zeke went quiet for a moment. Then he said that everyone kept asking him the same thing. He decided to ask his father directly. Was he not allowed to attack lowly upperclassmen during that ridiculous exam? When Blisa questioned what he meant, Zeke explained himself, saying the condition for passing the test was to survive in Poison Dragon Mountain for 1 month and protect a crystal orb. Aside from that, he hadn't heard any other rules. So, he followed the exam as it was given and used his time however he wanted while the test continued. He added that if there were any forbidden actions, they should have clearly stated them before the exam even began. Hearing Zeke's words, Raja felt a rush of fear and panic. He shouted, demanding to know what Zeke was trying to say and why he was speaking like that in front of the Master Head. Patriarch Lisa's eyes narrowed. A terrifying dragon aura erupted from her in an instant. The moment Patriarch Leah's aura burst out, Freya collapsed to her knees. She thought the Masterhead's aura was so overwhelming that it truly felt like she intended to kill Zeke, completely opposite of what Freya expected. But Zeke remained standing. Leah's pressure didn't affect him at all. On top of that, he told her to stop trying to intimidate him because it was becoming irritating. Leah's expression darkened in shock and anger. While Freya was still kneeling, Zeke asked if she had called him here just to ask useless, meaningless questions. Leah then demanded to know how he had done it. Zeke didn't understand and asked what she was talking about. Leah explained the reports. Not only had he defeated the senior upperclassman, he had also taken down a 3-star golem, and now he was standing calmly despite her releasing such overwhelming dragon aura, an aura strong enough to crush the entire room. She sincerely demanded to know how someone like Zeke, a mere child born out of wedlock, had acquired such impossible strength and power. Zeke asked if Leah truly wanted to know the real reason for his strength. He said it was simple. The reason was that he was Zeke. Leah's eyebrows twitched in frustration at that arrogant answer. Zeke's gaze sharpened as he delivered it without hesitation. A long, silent stretch followed, the tension between father and son sharp and suffocating. Finally, Patriarch Leah spoke. She said Zeke's personality was truly awful and unbearably rude. Even so, the reports were clear, and she would reward him for defeating the 3-star golem. Leah told him he could choose what he wanted, either a single item from the dragon treasury or access to the 2nd floor of the dragon hall. Freya stiffened in silent caution. She couldn't understand what was happening or why the head of the dragon hall was rewarding him at all. In her mind, both the dragon treasury and the dragon hall were sacred repositories of rare items collected by the Eldaron family for more than 1,000 years, dating back to the legendary founder, Patriarch Gilfus Eldaron. Leah explained that the dragon hall stored countless books, including techniques now considered forbidden. The dragon treasury, on the other hand, held relics collected by the Eldaron family's former heads. Legendary weapons, spirit tools, ancient medicines, artifacts, and items from eras long past. Both places also contained the Eldaron family's secret vaults, heavily guarded and rarely opened. Only a few chosen pupils were allowed to enter, and even then one needed exceptional results just to access the 2nd floor, let alone higher levels. Freya felt overwhelmed. Despite all the disrespect Zeke had shown his father, Master Blissa still considered him outstanding enough to earn such a reward. She couldn't believe it. Zeke then said that if Leah was giving rewards, there was no need to act difficult and make him choose. Why couldn't he simply have access to both the Dragon Hall and the Dragon Treasury? Leah stared at him silently for a moment, then said he would choose only one. She added that they could leave. Zeke pointed at her, unable to believe their conversation was already ending. He said he still had plenty to say. This pushed Freya over the edge. She grabbed Zeke by the collar, dragging him back. With a cheerful tone, she said it was an incredible honor to receive a reward directly from the Masterhead. She added that she finally understood the order and that they would be leaving immediately. As Freya turned her back and dragged Zeke away, he said there was one last thing he wanted to say. He told Blissa that if things continued like this, if Blissa kept killing off his own emotions, he would never grow stronger, no matter what he did. Blissa was stunned. Her aura flared again, only to be immediately suppressed by the divine dragon energy surrounding Zeke. Freya trembled and begged him to be quiet. After they left Patriarch Leah's office, Leah stood frozen in silence, questioning what kind of presence he had just felt from his own son. Outside the main hall, Zeke walked silently, but Freya exploded. She demanded to know what he had been doing, what had gone through his mind, and why he had spoken so rudely to his father, the head of the entire family. She asked if he had ignored her warning before entering the room. Zeke only asked what she was talking about. He said he had been holding himself back so he could act properly in front of Blissa. Freya couldn't believe it. She asked if he seriously thought that counted as restraining himself, and why he could speak politely politely to instructors and even to her, yet treat the headmaster that way? Zeke replied that Lisa was his father, so the way he spoke to him was naturally different. Freya could only stare. With Zeke's strength and personality combined, she muttered that he truly wasn't an ordinary child and asked who he really was. Zeke looked at her and asked if she was seriously questioning his identity and what right she had to demand who he was. As he always said, he was Zeke. Freya was left speechless. In her mind, every child of the family had consumed ancient dragon blood at birth. Yet none of them could defy the Master Head. Lisa carried the power of the Dragon King, a superior lineage among all ancient dragons. Even Zeke shouldn't have been able to withstand her. That was why Freya wondered what kind of child he truly was. Someone who could stand calmly in front of the Master Head without being crushed. When she fell silent, Zeke asked if there was a problem. She forced herself to say no, though she was already thinking she needed to investigate his birth record thoroughly. She then asked which reward he would choose. Once again, she explained that he could either enter the Dragon Hall up to the second floor, or take one item from the Dragon Treasury, but only one. Zeke asked if he could have both. Freya immediately said no, so he chose the Dragon Hall. It contained knowledge, and right now he needed that more. He thought about how little he understood of the current era. He wanted to learn about the medicines and tools developed over the last 1,000 years, even if he was allowed only one opportunity. At that moment, Rangus arrived, stunned that they were actually being allowed into the Dragon Hall of the Eldrian family. When Zeke asked if he was happy, Rangus instantly confirmed it. He said the strike of Eldrian combat art and the nutrition dragon sphere art he had learned were already incredible, and now he had the chance to study even better martial arts from the Dragon Hall. He still couldn't believe they were receiving such a great reward for passing the exam. Zeke stood silently staring at the Dragon Hall. Leika waved a hand in front of him, asking if he was even listening to her. When they finally reached the Eldrian Hall, the Guardian stepped forward and announced that their time limit inside would be 5 hours, reminding them to use their time wisely and remain silent once they entered. Zeke wasn't sure whether 5 hours was long or short. Leika, however, said it was already a generous amount of time. Most pupils were allowed only 2 hours, 3 at best. She added that the first thing they needed to do was decide which single book they would borrow. After that, they should use the remaining time to read as many other books as possible. Zeke mentioned that he had once heard of talented pupils who could read multiple books at the same time, but for now, his priority was simple. He needed to find a martial arts book that suited him before their time ran out. When they stepped into the Dragon Hall, Zeke noted that finding one suitable book to borrow would be more challenging than expected. Rangus and Selena were still stunned that they were actually inside the legendary hall. It looked even more overwhelming than they imagined. Rangus said the number of books was far more impressive than he expected. He smiled eagerly, wondering how much new knowledge he could discover and what unexpected insights he might gain. Zeke wilds out the second he gets his hands on the books. He's out here blitzing through content related to magic and chaos. It's too much information for him to just give up on. 1,000 years have left an incredible mark. Turns out that in that time span, their world ended up forming a connection with another one. Nearly 900 years into the past, a gigantic crack shook their reality, creating a dimensional wall called a rift. From it came the chaotic otherworld, the Chaos Realm Khans. This world inhabited monsters birthed from the element of chaos, and in order to resist their wrath, the people of Zeke's world ended up forming primal energies within their bodies. The Laragan family is responsible for aiding humanity against the tides of chaos. This allowed many bonds to form between families on the battlefield. 4 special warriors ended up marrying members of the Laragan house, which ended up forming Typhina, Fayfield, Levis, and Bahamut factions. They're now considered the 4 great Laragan families. And it all makes sense now, especially when the anger boar was covered in dark energy while Zeke fought it. Even Leika's thunderous aura exhibits such an energy. All of it came from a different dimension, but the most interesting part that stands out to him is the evolution of magic. With the connection to a dark dark reality came a new kind of technique. Unfortunately, Bro can't find a book related to the contents of that technique, especially when something this brilliant should be hailed as a part of history. His excitement is so loud that he draws the supervisor's attention, insisting the boy to keep quiet while reading. The strangest part is how there isn't a presence around him, and he could still hear the voice. This makes him wonder if this is the same magic, the same new technique, something that can be used via voice. But the problem is that aside from ordinary primal energy, he can't tell what's special about it. Suddenly, all of his books end up floating in a trail of yellow, levitating all on their own. Zeke can't contain his reaction and finds himself amused with the technique. The supervisor tells him to be quiet again, but Zeke just can't contain his reaction at the verge of experiencing a new level of growth. While he was busy wasting his time being excited, the library suddenly ended up closing in on him. Threads of ether restrain him before tossing his ass out the door. Zeke barely holds himself together while sticking his landing, questioning what the heck just happened. Bro wants to learn the same ether technique and demands the guy to use it again. Even Rangus can't tell what's up with him. While Leah is confused why he's the only one who got yeeted out, unlike the rest of them, fortunately, Rangus found an interesting martial arts manual that he borrowed called the Cloudwater Spear Technique. Then there's Celine, who learned a movement art alongside Wind Blossom Sword Technique. Raymond got his fair share by practicing the Laragan Guardian Sword Technique in the library. He even got a book for his shield skills. Basically, they ended up learning the same martial arts that Zeke created in his previous life while trolling. Finally, he asks Leah, hoping to learn what she got from the experience. She reveals a book containing the Heavy Wave Greats sword technique that the 15th Lord improved. This is Zeke's second time hearing about another 15th generation, making him wonder what's so special about it. Anyway, the 15th Lord is also directly responsible for creating Dragon Slayer combat arts. Now, even though our boy made a ton of techniques that became important manuscripts in the hall, a lot of them were improved versions of what he created. This means the 15th Lord is responsible for their advancement, impressing even the likes of Zeke himself. At first, he thought that his school life would be nothing but filled with boredom, but now, he's excited for the journey to come. We get a huge time skip that takes us 5 years into the future. Here, a 12-year-old Leah is looking around to find Zeke and her friends. She learns from Rangus that our boy is at the training grounds. Speaking of the training grounds, Zeke is currently squaring off against 3 of his friends, having become much stronger by age. Meanwhile, in Balsa's office, he received a report about the appearance of a special rift. When he asked the person on the other end whether the report was truly reliable, it was immediately confirmed. The man reporting was Ain, captain of the Black Dragon Corps, who stated that according to their investigation, there was roughly an 80% chance that water magic existed inside this newly appeared special rift. Balsa responded that the location where the rift had appeared was an extremely troublesome spot, and he questioned why. Out of all the places within their territory, the special rift had manifested there. Still, they could not afford to ignore it, as there was a high probability that magic water existed inside the rift. According to Balsa, anyone who drinks magic water becomes a mage, because those who consume it gain a special constitution that allows them to convert source power into a different force known as mana. He further explained that the emergence of mana-based magic introduced entirely new techniques to the world, and at the same time sparked fierce territorial struggles over the sources of magic water known as magic springs. In this age of magic, the number of mages directly determines a house's military strength. However, within Eldrian territory, not a single magic spring existed. For a house like the Eldragon family, which possessed no magic springs, there was only one way to obtain magic water: conquering special rifts. At present, the number of Eldrian mages was extremely small, and including Balsa himself, all of them were hardened veterans who had obtained magic water through special rift conquests. Even so, in terms of sheer numbers, they were being overwhelmed by other houses that owned magic springs. For this reason, conquering special rifts was Eldrian's top priority mission. However, as Ayan had reported, the location where the special rift appeared, the abundant dragon forest, was far too troublesome. There had even been a small border skirmish in the surrounding region just the other day. The abundant dragon forest was a vast woodland that lay mostly within Laragan territory, but part of it stretched into the lands of another house, those who claimed broader ownership of the forest and referred to it as the Great Abundant Forest were the Kerberos family. Ain added that the rift itself was certainly within Eldrian lands, but considering its scale and position, the special domain formed around it might extend into Kerberos territory. Knowing those mongrels, there was a high chance they would swarm toward it. Balsa remarked that their noses were the only thing they were good for, and in any case, they would detect the special rift sooner or later. Thus, the Eldragon family had to prepare with a struggle against them in mind, since it was a special rift. Both sides would have limited options, but they needed to act before the Kerberos family caught on. With that decided, Balsa immediately instructed Ain to inform all dragons' nests at once and announced that a selection exam would be held as soon as possible. Meanwhile, at the training grounds, Leah commented that Rangus and the others really went all out every time they trained with Zeke. In the middle of it all, Zeke remained calm as he waited for their attacks. As the three of them attacked Zeke simultaneously from different directions, Zeke's expression darkened as he strengthened his body and accepted all of their blows at once. With the sharp tip of Rangus's spear pressed and embedded into the hero's cheek, Zeke remarked that their coordination was good, but that Rangus was putting too much force into his spear, which ruined the true strength of spear arts. At the time, Rangus was 11 years old. As for Selene, who was 12, Zeke advised her that she focused too much on speed and the number of strikes, leaving no weight behind her attacks, and that she needed to find a proper balance. Raymond, who was also 12, was told by Zeke that his movements and use of the shield were good and correct. Even so, Zeke stated that all of them were still far too passive, and he told them to get more accustomed to attacking. Once again, he instructed them to come at him. As Rangus charged forward again, Leah remarked that watching their training was still completely insane. When Zeke asked what exactly she found so crazy about it, Leah replied that letting himself get hit bare-bodied without using source power was total madness. Zeke simply asked what she was talking about and said that this was proper training for him. Shouting toward Leah while flexing his muscles beneath his shirt, he told her that she should witness the fruits of his training. Zeke added that because of this training, his body had become sturdy even without source power. Leah complained that Zeke should at least have them stop attacking while they were talking. But at that very moment, Rangus delivered a powerful spear strike from behind Zeke. Rangus declared that Leah should look closely at his attack to see just how insane Zeke's body truly was. This caused Leah to shut her eyes and clutch her head, muttering that all of them were truly abnormal. Not only did Zeke refuse to use any bodily defense, but Rangus and the others continued attacking him with full force. Raymond suddenly asked how Zeke could possess such incredible defense without using source power, while Selene said that it was far too mysterious to be explained by the human body. Leah told them not to lump Zeke in with humans because Zeke was not one of them. She then asked if they knew what the seniors used to call Zeke and revealed that he was known as the Eastern Hall's Demon Child. This prompted Zeke to ask whether that title was meant as an insult before questioning what Leah's purpose was in coming to see them and whether she wanted to join their training. Leah replied that training was fine, but there was something she wanted to tell Zeke first. When Zeke asked what it was, Leah said it looked like they would soon be seeing children from the other dragons' nests, and much sooner than expected. Rangus was visibly shocked by this, while Raymond commented that he had figured it would happen someday, though he hadn't expected it to be so early and that it was finally time to meet them. When Selene asked if this was for the next test, Leah replied that even she didn't know the details. Zeke then asked where Leah picked up such rumors, to which she answered that she simply observed the instructors, their conversations, and their movements. Zeke said that he had never paid attention to such things, meaning gossip and rumors from instructors the way Leah always did. Leah responded that regardless they needed to be careful because the West Hall had that guy. By that guy, she meant one of the next head candidates besides herself and Zeke. Zeke merely said that now it sounded fun. A few days later, the students of the East Dragon's Nest were gathered in the arena, including several students who were being introduced for the first time. Zeke noted that everyone had been assembled in the arena without any distinction by grade, and Leah agreed, adding that just as she had said before, they would meet students from other dragons' nests. After a short while, the students suddenly fell silent as Freya arrived and immediately ordered them to quiet down. Once the students were lined up before her, Freya announced that 3 days from now, they would be fighting the children of the other dragons' nests. Freya announced that in 3 days' time, they would be facing the children of the other dragon nests. Shock rippled through the crowd. Panic spread among the juniors. Raymond frowned deeply. Celine fell silent. Leica stood motionless, her expression firm with determination, while Angus stiffened, clearly unsettled, and Zeke smiled for the first time in a long while. He felt genuinely excited. Freya stepped forward and held 3 fingers out in front of her, her voice echoing clearly across the training grounds. She announced that in exactly 3 days, every student present would be facing the children of the other dragon nests. The moment her words settled in, shock rippled through the crowd. Battles between dragon nests were no small matter. Such clashes were traditionally held only during graduation examinations, when students had already proven themselves. To announce one so abruptly left many students stunned, unable to grasp why it was happening now. If Freya allowed the confusion to linger for a moment before continuing, she then stated calmly that there was a reason behind this decision, but made it clear that she could not reveal all the details. However, she promised them one thing with certainty. Those who won this tournament would be entrusted with a special mission. At those words, Zeke's eyes gleamed faintly. He did not ask what the mission was. He did not need to. Anything described as special in this academy inevitably involved danger, combat, and growth. To him, it sounded far too interesting to ignore. Freya continued explaining the structure of the event. The tournament would follow an elimination format, with 7 students selected from each of the 4 dragon nests. Victory would come not through teams, but through individual strength. The Eastern nest, she emphasized, would need to decide its 7 representatives today. A senior student stepped forward, his voice confident as he asked whether the 7 representatives would naturally be chosen from among the senior class. Freya answered calmly, asking him in return why he thought she had summoned every student, regardless of grade. Her implication was clear. The representatives would be chosen from all years, seniors and juniors alike. That answer immediately stirred unrest. Several senior students scoffed openly. They questioned what juniors could possibly contribute in a battle of this scale. Their dismissive gazes pressed down on the younger students, many of whom stiffened or trembled under the pressure. The seniors continued, asserting that only they were capable of fighting other dragon nests. To them, the juniors were nothing more than weaklings who would become liabilities in real combat. Before the argument could escalate further, Freya spoke again. This time her expression shifted, almost casual, even cartoonishly light. She stated that none of that mattered. Whether senior or junior, strong or weak, 7 students would be chosen today. Complaints would not change that fact. As Freya stepped away from the center of the training grounds, a senior student strode forward with clear authority. It was Rick, one of the strongest seniors of the Eastern nest. He turned toward the gathered juniors, his voice sharp as he declared that the 7 representatives for the tournament would naturally be chosen from among the seniors. With an arrogant sweep of his gaze, he asked if anyone had any objections. For a brief moment, silence followed. Then a single figure stepped forward from the junior ranks. It was Leica. She stated calmly that she did, in fact, have a complaint. According to her, there was no reason the 7 participants should be limited to seniors alone. She added that juniors, herself included, were more than qualified to compete. Rick's jaw tightened as he muttered her name under his breath. Regaining his composure, he replied coolly that Lady Leica must be misunderstanding the situation. This was not a matter of noble lineage or status, he said, but one of pure combat skill. In a head-to-head battle, experience and strength mattered above all else. Before Rick could finish his sentence, Leica released her mana. The air shifted. 3 brilliant stars manifested on her chest, shining unmistakably. Leica calmly asked whether someone with 3 stars still lacked the necessary skill. The seniors stared in disbelief. Rick's eyes widened slightly, his confidence cracking. Someone among the seniors muttered under their breath, questioning when a 3-star junior had even appeared. Then she continued, stating that she agreed participants should be chosen by strength, but asked a simple question in return. Were there truly 7 seniors stronger than her? She demanded an answer, and if there were not, she argued, then the selection must include freshmen as well. Rick clenched his teeth and responded that Leah was an exception, a special case. He raised his voice, insisting that no other junior could ever surpass the seniors. That was when another voice cut in, remarking casually that Rick was being far too loud. Rick turned sharply, irritated, asking what he had said. It was Zeke. He replied calmly, repeating that Rick was shouting unnecessarily. Then, with an almost amused expression, Zeke stated that the seniors clearly believed all juniors were weak and insignificant. As he spoke, Zeke released his aura. It surged outward, not explosively, but with terrifying pressure. Smiling faintly, Zeke proposed something simple. Instead of arguing, they should fight. From now on, everyone who wished to participate should battle freely until only 7 remained standing. Leah pinched the bridge of her nose, murmuring that things were escalating far too quickly. She knew how dangerous this could become. Still, she forced herself to step in before chaos fully erupted. She clarified her proposal, a ranking battle. Anyone who wished to participate in the tournament would enter. Over the next 3 days, their results would be recorded and rankings determined objectively. Those who ranked within the top 7 would represent the Eastern Nest. Seeing no better alternative and unwilling to back down publicly, Rick reluctantly approved the proposal, though he dismissed it as a waste of time, convinced the outcome was already decided. Leah turned back toward Zeke and asked whether he intended to participate in the qualification battles as well. Zeke's eyes lit up immediately. Without hesitation, he answered that of course he would. Then, turning slightly, he looked toward Rangus, Celine, and Raymond, calmly stating that they would be participating too. Rangus stiffened in shock, asking whether Zeke truly meant they were going to fight senior students head-on. There was disbelief in his voice, more surprise than fear. Zeke confirmed it without the slightest doubt. He reminded them that they had trained relentlessly together, pushing themselves far beyond their limits. Then he asked a simple question. What were they planning to do if they did not prove their results here? Celine let out a quiet breath, rolling her eyes as she admitted that the pressure was overwhelming. Even so, she acknowledged that running away now would only prove the seniors right. Raymond followed, stating that if this was happening, then he would give it everything he had. No excuses, no holding back. The 3 naturally took their places beside Zeke, forming their familiar lineup. Seeing this, Leah turned toward the other junior students and asked if anyone else wished to join the qualification battles. The response was hesitant. Some juniors murmured among themselves, pointing out that even if Leah and Zeke were confident, their opponents were still seniors, many of whom possessed 3-star mana ranks as well. To them, victory seemed impossible. Zeke listened in silence before muttering that he could not understand why everyone was already so demoralized. He stated that there was far more to gain from fighting a superior opponent than avoiding them. Even defeat, he believed, carried value, experience, insight, and growth that could never be obtained by standing still. After a brief pause, he added that it no longer mattered. The moment had already come. As Zeke, Leah, and the juniors who had chosen to step forward stood ready, Zeke glanced toward the seniors with a faint, confident smile. Quietly, he remarked that it was finally time to see what the senior students were truly capable of. The moment the upperclassmen drew their weapons, they started mocking the freshmen. They complained about how selfish lowerclassmen had become these days. No matter how hard they tried, there was no way they could ever beat upperclassmen. As Rangus and the others gathered together, their bodies stiff with anxiety, one of the upperclassmen laughed. He said mockingly, "Go easy on them." Another one joined in, saying, "Except for Lady Leah, they're all basically babies, 2-star trash." Zeke noticed their reactions immediately. He looked at Rangus and asked calmly, "Why do you all look so gloomy? Are you scared?" Rangus didn't deny it, and he said, "Our opponents are all 3-star upperclassmen. Of course we're worried." Zeke smiled. He said, "For 5 years, you trained with me, and you did well." Then he looked each of them in the eye, saying, "So trust yourselves." Celine and Raymond straightened their backs, confidence returning instantly. Only Rangus still couldn't completely calm his nerves. That's when an upperclassman shouted from across the arena, "Enough talking! You're wasting our time! Upperclassmen don't have time for brats! Hurry up! We'll teach you your place!" And then, less than 1 minute later, the entire arena fell into chaos. The spectators stared in disbelief, inquiring, "What just happened? How did the lowerclassmen win so easily?" Some Some even whispered, "Are the upperclassmen weak this year?" But others shook their heads. "No, these lowerclassmen are monsters." Zeke wore a wide grin. He immediately praised Rangus and the others. In his eyes, Rangus' deflection skills and ability to spot openings had grown incredibly sharp. Celine handled the multi-strike windflower sword arts flawlessly, and Raymond smoothly switched between shield and sword like a veteran. Their training had paid off, and with real combat experience, they would only grow stronger. Zeke also noticed Leah. With her lightning aura, she could end fights in a single strike. Meanwhile, the defeated upperclassmen were still frozen in shock. Leica spoke calmly. "If you defeat your enemy, you should do it decisively. Arrogance deserves punishment." But Rick couldn't accept reality. He said, "There's no way 3-star upperclassmen lost to 2-star freshmen." That's when Zeke walked toward him. Zeke said coldly, "You're naive. You saw the result with your own eyes, yet you still talk nonsense." He stopped in front of Rick. Zeke continued, "Age and star rankings are just indicators. In real combat, only one thing matters. The winner is strong, the loser is weak." Rick snapped. He pointed at Zeke and shouted, "You idiot! Stars equal power. Don't you know something that basic?" Zeke didn't raise his voice. He replied, "Whether you have stars or not, if your heart is destroyed, you die all the same." Rick fell silent. Zeke continued, "Don't lose sight of the essence of strength. Strength is simply the ability to win, nothing more." Rick exploded again. "Shut up! Who do you think you are? I'm an upperclassman. I went easy on those kids, but now I won't hold back." Zeke sighed. He said, "I'm tired of talking. Children should move their bodies, not their mouths." Only the two of them remained in the arena. Zeke said, "So show me the martial arts you're so proud of." Rick roared in rage and charged forward, unleashing his full power. But before his attack could land, Zeke's eyes glowed gold. One punch. Rick was sent flying across the arena. Silence. Zeke laughed lightly, saying, "You trained well." The entire audience froze. Rick knelt on the ground, unable to move. Students whispered in disbelief. "Zeke is insane. Rick didn't even get to show anything." Meanwhile, at the West Hall training grounds, students groaned in pain, clutching their injuries. One man let out a deep sigh and said, "Every single one of you is useless." This man was Vanil Fafnilde Elragon, a candidate for the next family head. Soon after, more students arrived. One of them bowed and said, "Lord Vanil, the selection here is complete." This was Alan, Vanil's right-hand man, a 3-star warrior. Behind him stood the successful candidates, including a 12-year-old boy. Vanil's eyes narrowed, asking, "Your name?" He replied, "Retin." Vanil inquired, "You're a 3-star as a lower-classman?" He said, "Yes." Vanil smiled, saying, "I like competent people. If you're useful, I'll make you my subordinate." Retin bowed deeply, excitement burning in his chest. With Lord Vanil here, the West Hall could never lose, and if the special mission succeeded, Vanil would become the next family head, which meant Retin would stand directly beneath him. Alan leaned in and whispered something. "Lady Leica will be participating in the East Hall selection." Vanil scratched his head in irritation, saying, "That annoying pest again?" Then he stood up. He said coldly, "It doesn't matter. No matter how excellent she is, we will win." He clenched his fist and said, "I'll prove to my brothers that the seat of family head belongs to me." On the day of the selection, all of the participants gathered along with the students of Dragon's Nest from the various dragon halls. Because of the sheer number of students who came to watch, Rangus couldn't help but feel nervous as he muttered that there were so many people in the arena. Leica then explained that most of the students from the different halls had gathered to witness the selection, and she also added that since some kids had dropped out during the exams, the number of students had already been greatly reduced, asking Rangus if he agreed. Instead of answering her question, Rangus thought to himself that Leica was right, and that those who had dropped out of Dragon's Nest weren't here because they were called pseudo-dragons, just like his dad. Leica immediately noticed the sadness on Rangus's face, so she quickly changed the topic, patting him on the back as she said that what mattered was that they had been chosen as representatives of the East Hall and that they should be proud of themselves. Rangus immediately agreed and said that he would do everything he could in the upcoming selection. Soon after, they noticed their protagonist standing standing quietly among the participants of the selection. When they approached Zeke, Rangus immediately asked if something was wrong, while Laika also remarked that Zeke seemed unusually quiet today. Zeke replied that there was no problem and that he was simply gauging the fighting strength of the students around him. Suddenly, Rangus collapsed in shock when they heard a loud voice saying, "As expected of Lord Zeke, to think that he can also do such a thing." When Zeke turned toward the source of the voice, he saw two students running toward them. At the same time, Zeke casually remarked that things had certainly changed. The two upperclassmen, who were also members of the selection and were currently running toward him, immediately agreed with what Zeke said. Rick added that after their battle, they had reconsidered their way of thinking, and even though he was part of El Dragon, he genuinely respected the strong. Zeke simply replied that it wasn't a bad thing, so it was fine. Meanwhile, Rangus burst into tears as he clung to Zeke's legs, saying that he was truly shocked by Rick's sudden shout, and they helped Rangus stand up. Zeke thought to himself that every participant in the selection from the different dragon halls was at the 3-star level, except for those from the East Hall. As he expected, there were no 4-star students among the participants, but there were several who already had 1 foot in that realm. That was why Zeke was excited to see what kind of techniques he would witness this time. While they continued talking, a girl suddenly hugged Laika from behind, and Laika immediately recognized her as Sandy. Because of Laika and Sandy's loud voices, Zeke also turned his attention toward them. While still hugging Laika, Sandy said that it had been a long time since they last saw each other and asked how Laika had been. She also asked if anyone was bullying Laika, but Laika simply replied that she was fine. When Celine asked who the person hugging Laika was, Laika immediately introduced her as Sandy, her cousin Sandy Typhona, the daughter of the Typhona family head. This shocked Rangus and the others, as Sandy was also a member of one of the 4 great families. With a serious tone, Sandy asked Laika who these kids were, and Laika answered that they were her companions and also her friends. Sandy then asked if Laika was sure they were her friends, saying that while it was good to get along with other kids, they lacked the ability to be Laika's companions, since Laika was one of the candidates to become the next family head of the Eldrian family. Zeke immediately intervened, saying that it would only become clear when they fought. When Sandy asked who he was, Laika quickly said that he was Zeke, and also one of the candidates like her. Sandy then asked if he really was a candidate and whether he was the rumored illegitimate child of the current family head. She bluntly stated that she never thought a mere bastard like Zeke would still be alive. Despite Sandy's harsh words, Zeke remained smiling. Laika was clearly shocked and immediately asked Sandy why she was acting like that in front of her friends and Zeke. Sandy was surprised by Laika's reaction and said that even if Zeke was an illegitimate child, he was still Laika's rival. She added that Laika wouldn't be able to defeat the other family head candidates with such an attitude. Sandy also remarked that Zeke's group was of poor quality, as none of them were even 3-star level, and asked if the East Hall students were really that weak now. Zeke suddenly cut in, pouting slightly as he warned Sandy that if she kept looking down on them the way she was now, she would end up having the rug pulled out from under her. Sandy's expression immediately darkened, her eyes narrowing as she asked Zeke to repeat what he had just said, questioning whether a mere illegitimate child with no backing other than the family head's blood was actually daring to lecture her. Zeke calmly replied that what he said wasn't advice, but a warning. This caused Sandy to flare up in anger, but another student quickly stepped in and said that Sandy shouldn't cause trouble for the other teams. The student introduced himself as Edgis Vanlade, a representative of the North Hall. As Rangus tried to recall who Edgis was, Sandy told him not to interfere, saying that they were in the middle of an important conversation. Edgis, however, smiled and said he couldn't let it slide since the selection battle was about to begin. As the students continued chatting while waiting for the selection to start, a man suddenly arrived and drew everyone's attention. Rangus, Laika, and Sandy all fell silent while Zeke smiled brightly, excited for the battle to come. The man who announced that the selection battle would now begin was none other than the captain of the Gold Dragon Corps, Teach, also known as the Educator. Menric announced that from this moment on, the selection battle would officially begin. He then explained to everyone that the matches would follow a tournament-style elimination format combining all 4 halls. According to him, the 4 halls would be split into 2 groups, and the halls that emerged victorious from each group would face each other in the finals. He added that the battle format would be one-on-one duels, where each hall would send out its fighters one at a time, following a predetermined order of the 7 participants from each hall. Menric further explained that the hall which defeated 4 opponents first would be declared the winner, and once the match began, no changes to the fighting order would be allowed. Because of this, the fighting order itself had to be carefully considered as part of each hall's strategy. As a final point, Menric revealed that those selected through this match would be assigned a special mission, one that was extremely important to the Eldrian family. Anyone who took part in this mission would make a significant contribution to the family, and for Leah and Veniel, gaining such contributions meant taking a major step closer to the head seat. After that, Menric said they would now determine the brackets and called forward the representatives of each hall in order to draw a stone from the box. The first he called was Veniel Fafnield, the representative of the West Hall. As Veniel approached the officer holding the box, he immediately reached inside and took a stone. Afterward, Menric promptly sent him back to his position. As Veniel walked away, a bead of sweat rolled down Leika's face as she stared at her older brother, who was also looking back at her and her group with a malicious smile. Zeke quickly noticed this and asked Leah if she knew that man. Leah immediately confirmed it and told Zeke that the man was the West Hall's head candidate she had mentioned before, none other than Veniel Fafnield Eldrian. "I see," Zeke replied simply, a faint smile forming on his face as he thought about it. Aside from Veniel, the West Hall had many strong warriors overall. Not only that, Zeke could also tell that the other halls were well-trained too, though everyone could clearly feel the difference in power between them. Soon, Zeke's gaze landed on Retin, and he thought that it had been a while since he last saw that face. According to Zeke, Retin already had considerable skill during the entrance exam, but to have reached the 3-star level at the age of 12 made Zeke smile, thinking that Retin must have trained extremely hard as well. Just then, Retin suddenly noticed Rangus, and his expression darkened with hostility as he questioned why Rangus was even included in the current selection. Students who recognized Rangus were also shocked, some even shouting in surprise as they wondered what Rangus was doing in the arena. Because of this, Rangus once again felt nervous. When Raymond noticed it, he immediately asked if Rangus was okay. Rangus hesitantly replied that he was fine, while Retin continued to stare at him with clear, malicious intent. Soon after, Menric called the representative of the North Hall. After Edgis drew a stone from the box, Menric then called the representative of the South Hall, who likewise took a stone. Finally, he called the last representative from the East Hall. When Leika heard this, she immediately told Zeke that he was being called forward, causing Zeke to look at her in confusion as he asked why he had to be their representative. Leika calmly replied that the reason was simple. It was because he was the strongest in their group. Rick and the others immediately agreed with her, while Zeke questioned whether, in situations like this, it would be better to send the youngest member of the group instead. Leika merely asked what he meant by that, then added that they were all about the same age anyway, before ordering Zeke to go forward and take a stone. With no other choice, Zeke accepted his role as the East Hall's representative and stepped forward. However, Sandy suddenly questioned why an illegitimate child like Zeke was chosen as their representative instead of Leika herself. Leika simply replied that it was because Zeke was the strongest among them. Even so, Sandy did not believe her. According to Sandy, Zeke was not even at the 3-star level like Leika. She also reminded Leika that the selection was effectively a head candidate battle between her and Veniel, and that at this rate, Leika would surely lose. Leika merely smiled and said that it was fine, and that there would be no problem, confidently declaring that their team was strong. After Zeke took the last stone from the box, Menric instructed each hall's representative to channel their source source power into the stone they had drawn. As they did so, the stones began to glow, turning either blue or red. Menric then explained that the colors would determine the brackets, announcing that the first match would be East Hall versus North Hall, followed by West Hall versus South Hall. Upon learning that their first opponent would be the North Hall, Zeke's group immediately turned their attention toward Sandy and Edgis's team. They soon noticed a particularly tall student, and upon seeing his appearance and the sharpness of his gaze, Rangus shuddered in shock and asked if that tall man was truly a student of Dragon's Nest. Leah confirmed it, though she had not expected that they would be facing Sandy's team in the very first match. Meanwhile, Sandy released her lightning aura and told Leah that this was a good opportunity to wake her up. Pointing at Leah's team, Sandy declared that she would thoroughly crush Leah so that she would remember her position and purpose in life. Leah, however, did not waver. As her golden lightning aura surged forth, she told Sandy to bring it on. At the same time, while holding the blue stone, Zeke noticed Edgis smiling calmly as he said that it looked like they would be fighting in the first match and that he was really looking forward to it. Seeing Edgis's reaction and hearing his words, Zeke replied that it seemed like they would get along, adding that he too was looking forward to the battle and could not wait to fight anymore. Meanwhile, after a brief moment of silence filled the entire arena, Menric declared that the first match would take place between East Hall and North Hall. As soon as everyone heard the announcement, Eric immediately told Lord Zeke that he would do everything he could to win his fight. However, despite his determined words, his expression betrayed him, causing sweat to trickle down Leah's cheek as she nervously asked Zeke if Eric would really be all right, since his anxiety was clearly visible. Zeke simply agreed with her observation. Soon after, Menric asked whether both groups were ready for the match. Once Eric stepped into the center of the arena to face his opponent, Menric immediately ordered the start of the battle. Eric charged at his opponent right away after gathering his source power into his fist. As Zeke and the others watched from the sidelines, Zeke couldn't help but wonder what the outcome of Eric's match would be. Leah responded by saying that judging by their appearances, it was going to be a tough fight, and she quickly asked for Zeke's opinion. Zeke simply replied that there was no such thing as a guaranteed victory in any battle unless they were talking about himself, since he was confident that his wins were always absolute. Leah then clarified that she wasn't referring to him but to Eric, so Zeke decided to just focus on watching the fight. Zeke added that in terms of skill alone, North Hall's fighter wasn't much different from Eric, and if Eric fought the way he normally did, he should be able to win. Leah immediately agreed, but pointed out that this was their first time fighting in front of such a large crowd, and the pressure of representing their team was also a heavy burden. As Eric continued to receive relentless attacks from his opponent, Zeke admitted that Leah's words were true, though he also mentioned that Sandy and Edgis Vanlade were exceptions. Zeke explained that both Sandy and Edgis were already on the verge of reaching the 4-star level, meaning they wouldn't be easily shaken. He also remembered that Sandy was Leah's cousin from the Typhona family, which likely meant she wielded techniques from the same lineage, and he noted to himself that this would become valuable battle experience for Leah. After Eric was eventually knocked down by his opponent, Menric declared that the winner of the first match was North Hall. Because of this, Marin became extremely nervous, and despite her hesitation, she said she needed to win. Leah tried to comfort her, telling her not to be too anxious and that she would be fine. But in just a moment, Marin was also defeated by her opponent, leaving Zeke and Leah with nothing but a sigh. As Eric and Marin trembled, they apologized to Zeke for their losses. But Zeke simply laughed and said he already knew they were completely overwhelmed by the atmosphere of the arena. He added that they didn't need to worry because if this were a real battlefield where life and death were at stake, the results would surely be different. Zeke cheerfully reminded them that the place they were in now was meant for learning and testing their strength, not for killing each other. He explained that lessons like today's were experiences they could only gain safely here, and that their failures would become nourishment for them on a real battlefield in the future. So, they only needed to continue honing their skills. Hearing this, Eric and Marin quickly regained their spirits. However, their team had already suffered 2 straight losses, making the next match extremely important, and Zeke immediately asked if Rangus understood that. Rangus, already overwhelmed with fear and shock, begged Zeke not to make him even more nervous, saying he had been anxious since morning, and to make matters worse, he would be facing the largest and most intimidating member of North Hall. After seeing his opponent's glowing red eyes, Rangus burst into tears with his nose running, hugging Zeke while saying that his opponent was a terrifying upperclassman and he was truly scared. Zeke calmly reminded Rangus that he had already fought senior students before when they were forming teams, but Rangus insisted that none of the East Hall seniors had looked as frightening as this opponent. Rangus also admitted that fighting someone so intimidating in front of such a huge crowd made him extremely nervous, causing Zeke to sigh while gently holding Rangus's head. Zeke then wrapped his arm around Rangus and told him to carefully observe his opponent, asking what weapon he was holding. After taking a closer look, Rangus saw the massive sword his opponent carried. When Rangus told Zeke that his opponent used a sword, Zeke confirmed it and explained that Rangus was simply fighting someone holding a sword, so he didn't need to think about anything else. Zeke said that if his opponent thrust the sword, Rangus only needed to parry it. If the opponent slashed upward, he only needed to pull back. And if the opponent swung downward, he only needed to step forward and thrust his spear. Zeke emphasized that Rangus only needed to focus on dealing with the weapon in front of him, just like he always did. Because of Zeke's words, Rangus gradually regained his confidence. When Zeke looked into Rangus's eyes, he realized how impressive Rangus's focus was. Zeke knew Rangus still needed guidance to center himself for now, but once he could naturally enter that focused state, he would grow far beyond his current limits. As Rangus and his opponent stepped into the center of the arena, Zeke couldn't help but wonder how much this battle would help Rangus grow. Meanwhile, the spectators quickly noticed the massive size difference between Rangus and his opponent, commenting that there was no way the scrawny Rangus could match him. After Menric signaled the start of the match, Rangus's opponent immediately charged forward and used the triple leaf sword style technique called single blade branch. But before the attack could land, Rangus swiftly dodged it. Despite this, the giant opponent declared that Rangus wouldn't be able to escape him and followed up with the twin fang branch technique, launching a barrage of attacks. However, Rangus skillfully dodged and parried every strike. Even so, Leah remained extremely worried, and Celine noticed that Rangus's opponent was gradually moving closer to cut off Rangus's preferred range. Reynold quickly asked Zeke if Rangus would be all right, but Zeke assured them there was no need to worry, pointing at Rangus's eyes and saying he was becoming more focused as the battle progressed. After once again dodging his opponent's sword swing, the giant used another triple leaf sword style technique called Leaf Storm Dance to attack Rangus. But before the attack could hit, Rangus's eyes suddenly flashed with clarity. He immediately used his Cloudwater Spear style technique called Flowing Clouds and water to parry the sword. The force from their clash caused the giant opponent to lose his balance, and Rangus wasted no time seizing the opportunity. Using another Cloudwater Spear style technique called Raging Current Strike, Rangus thrust his spear into his opponent's chest, knocking him unconscious and sending him crashing to the ground. Menric immediately declared the match over and announced that East Hall had won the third match. Rangus sighed in relief, while Zeke smiled and stated that they should start turning the battle around, beginning with Rangus's victory. East Hall steadily gained momentum as Celine won the fourth match and Reynold claimed victory in the fifth match. Soon, the sixth match began between Leah and Sandy. Leah greeted Sandy, saying it had been a while since they last crossed swords like this. While both wielded lightning great sword techniques, Sandy admitted she never expected North Hall's elites to lose to younger students who hadn't even reached the 3-star level. Leah calmly replied that, as she had said before, her companions were strong. Sandy mockingly agreed, admitting she underestimated Leah's companions, but stated that they weren't the real issue between them. As Sandy released her golden aura, Leah was visibly startled and nervous. Sandy declared that Leah's companions were secondary, and that if Leah Laika truly wanted to become the family head, she needed overwhelming power herself, yet she was only second in East Hall. Sandy questioned whether Laika truly understood how dangerous her position was. Laika answered that she fully understood her standing, and while glancing at Zeke behind her, she said she had not given up on becoming the family head, nor on surpassing her sister Sandy, because she believed her current strength was enough to defeat her. Sandy responded by saying she wanted to see that confidence for herself. As soon as Sandy activated her ability, she vanished from Laika's sight, shocking the spectators. In an instant, Sandy reappeared behind Laika, saying she wanted to witness Laika's so-called strength. Laika quickly defended herself with her sword, but Sandy suddenly ducked in front of her and launched another attack. As they exchanged intense blows, Edgis observed that, as expected, Sandy held the advantage, though he wondered how well Laika could fight against someone who wielded lightning great sword arts even better than she did. When Sandy used the lightning great sword art called Judgment, Laika suffered a wound on her side, causing Celine and Marin to panic. After retreating, Laika reassured herself that she was fine, realizing the injury was only a scratch and that she simply needed to catch her breath. Rangus commented that Sandy was incredibly strong, amazed that Lady Laika had been pushed back so quickly, while Reynolds mentioned hearing that Lady Laika had been trained by Lady Sandy when she was younger. Laika then launched another attack towards Sandy, but after easily dodging it, Sandy remarked that Laika still hadn't fixed her bad habit of wildly swinging her sword whenever she was cornered. Laika ignored the remark, and as their lightning auras clashed alongside their blades, a powerful explosion erupted in the center of the arena. Laika suffered multiple injuries during their fierce exchange. Sandy then stated that, just as she expected, Laika's bad habits hadn't improved at all and that she couldn't even become #1 in East Hall. Sandy added that if Laika had simply joined North Hall, she would never have allowed Laika to end up like this. Despite her injuries, Laika slowly stood up and declared that the fight wasn't over. Sandy responded that it would be better for her to surrender because she couldn't defeat her at her current level. Sandy even said that if this was how things would turn out, she should have petitioned their father from the start and forcibly brought Laika to North Hall. Laika remained silent, and after raising her sword again, Sandy remarked that Laika was being stubborn, leaving her no choice but to teach her a lesson. In a flash, Sandy disappeared once more and reappeared behind Laika, surrounded by lightning, launching another attack. Just as Laika attempted to defend with her sword, Sandy kicked her in the side, throwing her off balance before following up with another strike. Sandy unleashed a relentless barrage of attacks, causing Laika to suffer injuries across multiple parts of her body. Celine and the others grew extremely worried, but Zeke calmly observed that Laika looked like she was about to break through another barrier. As Sandy prepared another attack, she told Laika that it would be better to surrender and used the first secret technique of the lightning great sword arts, engulfing Laika in a golden storm of lightning. The audience fell silent as they wondered if the battle had ended, but Sandy was shocked when Laika stood up again, saying that now she finally understood how powerful Sandy's lightning great sword arts truly were. Sandy couldn't hide her disbelief, questioning how Laika was still standing because her last attack should have been the finishing blow. Laika admitted Sandy was right, saying that the old version of herself would have been defeated by that attack. But over the past 5 years, she had been training relentlessly as well, and their match was far from over. It was only just beginning. Before Sandy and Laika's match began, Zeke asked if something was bothering Laika because she wasn't acting like her usual self. Zeke also asked if she was nervous, and Laika admitted that she was, since her opponent would be none other than her sister Sandy. Zeke asked, "Is that so?" Laika explained that her sister Sandy was the one who first taught her the basics of the lightning great sword arts. She learned the fundamentals from her uncle, the current head of the Typhona family. But whenever she didn't understand something, she would go to Sister Sandy for guidance, making Sandy something like a mentor to her. Zeke replied, "I see." Laika then confessed that she had never managed to defeat Sandy even once. She said that although she had grown stronger over the past 5 years, Sandy had been training just as hard as she had. Laika also admitted that despite everything she said earlier, she couldn't honestly say she was certain she would win against Sandy. Zeke calmly responded that in that case, Laika should remember their training together, and that she needed to recall the 5 long years they spent training side by side. However, the moment Laika remembered their training, her expression suddenly twisted as if she were about to cry from frustration, prompting Zeke to jokingly ask if training with him had really been that terrible. Zeke then explained that Laika's biggest weakness was her tendency to let her emotions narrow her focus whenever battles became intense. That was why, for the past 5 years, their training had been centered on helping her remain calm during combat. Laika agreed, saying that Zeke had certainly attacked her quite freely during their training sessions, but Zeke simply winked and said that was what true spirit meant. This only made Laika more irritated as she asked what kind of spirit he was talking about and how that could possibly count as spirit. Zeke simply replied that the results of that training were definitely showing, and that Laika should now be able to calmly analyze her opponent's movements, even while fighting. Laika admitted that might be true, but she still wasn't sure whether it would be enough to help her fight against Sister Sandy. Zeke assured her that she would soon find out once she faced Sandy, because when someone with Laika's talent truly observed her opponent's movements, she would come to understand just how powerful that ability could be. Zeke also reminded her not to forget that she had been trained by him, the strongest there was, so she no longer needed to worry about past results. Laika said that Zeke spoke as if it were obvious, and she immediately thanked him for helping her relax before her match. Zeke then asked if Sandy had really been the one who taught Laika the lightning great sword arts. When Laika confirmed it, Zeke said that this would be the perfect opportunity for her. Just like during training, all she needed to do was carefully observe Sandy's techniques, because if she did that properly, she would surely grow even stronger than Sandy. Back in the present battle, Laika stated that she had carefully observed her sister Sandy's lightning great sword arts, even taking Sandy's attacks head-on to study them thoroughly, and now she had finally begun to see through them. When Sandy asked what Laika was talking about, Laika suddenly launched an attack toward her. Because of the after-images created by Laika's sword movements, Sandy couldn't determine whether Laika had slowed down or stopped, allowing Laika to land a successful strike. While Sandy was still shocked by Laika's sudden counterattack, Laika continued to unleash a relentless barrage of lightning-infused sword strikes, leaving Sandy with no choice but to endure each attack. As Laika charged forward once again, Sandy could only question what was happening and why Laika had suddenly become so fast. When Laika attempted to replicate Sandy's earlier finishing move called Judgment, the attempt initially failed. However, Laika quickly realized that her mistake was failing to replicate the tempo variation that Sandy naturally possessed, something Laika previously lacked. Now that she understood it, she simply needed to apply it properly. Sandy argued that such mastery wasn't something Laika could instantly copy just by realizing it. Meanwhile, Rangus and the others watched in awe at the sudden transformation in Laika's movements and attacks. As soon as Menric announced the start of their match, Edgis rushed toward Zeke with incredible speed, slightly catching him off guard, but also filling him with excitement. Zeke noted that with just a single step, Edgis was able to cover such a vast distance, and he couldn't help but praise Edgis's footwork. Edgis, smiling confidently, immediately used his 1,000-blade style technique called 9 blades to attack Zeke. Because of the golden glow from Edgis's aura, Zeke was shocked to realize that the presence of Edgis's katana seemed to completely vanish. However, before Edgis's attack could strike Zeke's body, Edgis himself was startled when his blade only cut through Zeke's afterimage. After launching his attack, Edgis quickly realized that Zeke had avoided his strike by twisting his body within a split second. Edgis admitted that he was certain his attack would land, but Zeke simply smiled and praised the excellence of Edgis's strike, even asking him to show more of his techniques. Without hesitation, Edgis moved swiftly once again and unleashed another 1,000-blade style technique called Wave Blade toward Zeke. As Zeke carefully observed Edgis's attack, he commented that Edgis's blade trajectory was extremely difficult to read. Suddenly, Zeke was caught off guard when he realized that one of Edgis's attacks was coming from beneath the ground, something he had not anticipated. Even so, Zeke remained calm and continued praising Edgis's skill, saying that although he had no intention of allowing Edgis to cut him, the sword paths of Edgis were truly unpredictable. At that moment, Zeke concluded that Edgis was truly a genius, constantly changing his attack patterns without sacrificing speed or power. Edgis's source power flowed flawlessly without a single wasted movement, delivering sharp strikes that perfectly read Zeke's breathing and rhythm. Zeke knew that such mastery was impossible without relentless training. Meanwhile, because Zeke kept evading every attack, Edgis admitted that he couldn't believe he still couldn't catch him. Edgis praised Zeke, saying that he was truly incredible and asked what kind of training Zeke had undergone. Zeke simply asked if Edgis really wanted to know what kind of training he did, and then casually invited Edgis to train with him after their battle was over. Moments later, Zeke suddenly moved toward Edgis to launch his own attack. As Zeke's eyes flashed with determination, he struck forward with his fist toward Edgis. Edgis immediately raised his katana to block the attack, but the sheer force behind Zeke's punch caused Edgis's entire body to tremble, leaving him in disbelief that Zeke was supposedly only at the 2-star level. After delivering the punch, Zeke noticed the damage inflicted on his own fist, and he realized that although he had tried altering his breathing pattern, Edgis had already adapted to that as well. Because of this, Zeke couldn't help but admit that Edgis was an even more exceptional warrior than he had initially expected. Edgis then remarked that Zeke had finally launched an attack against him and asked if that meant Zeke was already finished observing his techniques. Zeke replied that to some extent, he was. Hearing this, Edgis wondered if Zeke had already figured out his abilities. Edgis then launched another swift attack towards Zeke. As Zeke watched the incoming strike, he initially thought it was identical to the previous attacks, but he was suddenly shocked when just before the blade could reach him, Edgis abruptly changed the direction of his sword using his lingering shadow technique. The unexpected shift prevented Zeke from reacting in time, resulting in Edgis successfully striking Zeke across the chest. After landing his attack, Edgis asked whether he still needed to reveal more of his techniques in order to meet Zeke's expectations. Meanwhile, as Zeke held his chest, he couldn't believe that Edgis had managed to wound him during their fight. Even so, Zeke continued smiling, admitting that their battle was becoming more and more enjoyable. Meanwhile, as the intense battle between Zeke and Edgis continued, Sandy slowly regained consciousness. Their teammates immediately ran toward her, anxiously asking if she was all right. Sandy quickly responded that she was fine. Soon after, she realized that she had lost her match against Laika. Even so, as she recalled how Laika had defeated her, Sandy could not help but smile and let out a soft sigh. Although she had lost, she was genuinely pleased with the outcome of their fight and with Laika's current strength. After that, Sandy apologized to her teammates, saying that if she had won, they might still have had a chance to secure the special mission. However, her teammates immediately protested, insisting that they were the ones who should apologize for being a burden to her and Edgis. They all bowed their heads in front of Sandy, but she firmly told them that what they were thinking was not true. According to Sandy, their opponents were simply that strong. She added that they just needed to train harder so they would not lose again next time. Hearing this, her teammates felt encouraged and regained their spirits. Sandy then asked whether the match between West Hall and South Hall had already begun, but one of them pointed toward the ongoing battle, saying that for some reason the current match was still going on. She also told Sandy that the fight happening right now was truly incredible. When Sandy looked toward the arena and saw the two fighters clashing, she could not help but feel shocked and wonder what was happening. She immediately realized that Edgis was using the 5 aura blades, which meant he was fighting seriously with his full strength. As Sandy continued watching the battle between Zeke and Edgis, she remembered what Laika had told her that among their group, Zeke was the strongest. That memory made her fall silent, as she had not fully believed Laika's words before, but now she understood that they were true. Meanwhile, Edgis used his 1,000 battle-style technique called 5 Shadow to attack the protagonist, but Zeke easily evaded it. Sweat immediately ran down Edgis's cheeks, as he could not believe that even that technique had failed to work against Zeke. On top of that, Edgis said that after fighting this much, Zeke was not even out of breath, and he immediately asked what kind of body Zeke possessed. Zeke simply replied that it was nothing special, that he had just put a lot of effort into training his basic stamina. stamina. He added that techniques are good, but fundamentals are just as important. I see, Edgis responded, saying that if that was the case, he would focus more on training his body from now on. He then used his ability once again to attack the protagonist, but with only his arms. Zeke shattered every single strike directed at him. At that moment, Zeke assessed that the blade's hardness, sharpness, generation speed, and range were around the lower upper tier overall. But considering Edgis's age, he could become very interesting in the future. Zeke smiled as he realized that through this battle with Edgis, he had finally confirmed something: the difference between 1,000 years ago and the present era. According to Zeke, in the martial arts of 1,000 years ago, the motion of the attack itself was paramount. The essence of martial arts was to express all creation through one's techniques, and source power was merely supplementary. But in the modern era, by manifesting source power, practitioners express all of creation through it. In other words, handling source power itself has become the essence of modern martial arts. As he continued evading the attacks, Zeke thought to himself that he had been foolish. He had focused so much on the techniques themselves that he had failed to notice this shift for so long. Even so, he found the changes of the past 1,000 years fascinating beyond measure. Meanwhile, as Edgis continued attacking, he realized that all his strikes were being perfectly countered by Zeke. He could only conclude to himself that Zeke was truly a superhuman. Rangus and the others remained deeply worried, and Rangus mentioned that the fight had already lasted for over an hour with no sign of ending. Leah, however, calmly said that neither of them was normal, but their battle would probably be over soon. Edgis then told Zeke that it looked like he had already finished observing all of his movements this time. Zeke did not deny it and said that their fight had been a truly wonderful experience. Edgis replied, "I think so too." Suddenly, the protagonist declared that he would pay his respect to Edgis. Therefore, what he had learned from their battle he would now present to Edgis as a new technique. As Zeke clenched his fist, Edgis suddenly felt an overwhelming pressure. Edgis laughed, saying that now he understood why he could not defeat Zeke. Even so, he gathered his full power and activated the 1,000-blade style secret technique called 5-blade ultimate strike, declaring that he would continue struggling until the end. However, before Edgis could launch his attack, Zeke suddenly leaped high into the air. While suspended above the arena, he gathered his source power into his fist and unleashed a rain of massive golden fists across the entire arena. This technique was Zeke's new move, the modified second form of his Dragon Destruction combat arts, which he called Fist Star. As a result, consecutive explosions erupted throughout different parts of the arena, causing the students watching to panic. When the attack finally struck Edgis, a tremendous explosion shook the entire arena. Reynold quickly raised his shield to protect his teammates, marveling at the sheer power of Zeke's attack. Sandy, meanwhile, was so stunned that she could only ask who had won the fight. At that moment, Menric declared that they had seen enough and announced the end of the match. As the smoke gradually cleared, Edgis's broken katana became visible. Lying on the ground, Edgis could only laugh, saying that he could not even move a single finger. He admitted that Zeke's strength was overwhelming and that he still had much more training to do if he wished to catch up. Though sweat continued to drip from Zeke due to exhaustion, he smiled as the victory was declared in favor of East Hall. The spectators could hardly believe what they had witnessed, and could not stop asking what kind of battle they had just seen, as well as how Edgis had been defeated. Menric then announced that they would repair the arena first before starting the match between West Hall and South Hall, instructing everyone to begin preparing. Rangus and the others were filled with admiration and joy, as they had not expected Zeke to defeat Edgis. Leah commented that Zeke had once again destroyed the arena and that he was strange in so many ways. Zeke immediately asked what she meant, adding that what mattered most was that he had won. He then said that whatever Leah meant was not important right now, because what they needed to focus on was watching the upcoming match between West Hall and South Hall. "That's right," Leah agreed, adding that another candidate for the position of family head would be participating in the next match, none other than Vanille Fafnid Eldrian. After the battle between Edgis and Zeke, Zeke asked Rangus if he had gone a bit overboard, because with with that level of destruction in the arena, he thought it would not be repaired anytime soon. However, Rangus told him it was fine and asked Zeke to look toward the side of the arena. Zeke was completely stunned and immediately asked how it was possible and how they had managed to restore the arena so quickly. Rangus then explained that the entire arena had been built using a rare stone called etherite, and when someone infused it with source power, it could restore itself to its original form. Upon hearing this, the protagonist immediately realized that this was yet another incredible material that had appeared during the 1,000 years he had been gone. As Zeke continued to marvel at the sight, Rangus added that using such an expensive material to construct an arena of this size was truly astonishing. While smiling, Zeke said that West Hall seemed to have the best overall quality, but South Hall also had some strong-looking fighters, so he wondered how their battle would turn out. However, contrary to Zeke's expectations, the match between West Hall and South Hall became utterly one-sided. As the dust gradually settled, the examiner remained fixed on him, unease clouding his expression. The outcome did not sit right. Kikaso had shown enough ability to challenge Lirasar before, yet this battle had ended in a crushing, almost unnatural landslide. Venaniel broke the silence with a hollow, penetrating stare. He asked whether the fight was truly over, his tone implying he was more than willing to continue. The pressure radiating from him was suffocating. Sensing the oppressive shift in atmosphere, the examiner quickly announced the end of the match and declared Venaniel the victor representing the West Wing. The next announcement followed immediately. The final round would be East Wing versus West Wing. It would begin in 1 hour. Attention soon shifted away from the victor. Members of the defeated team rushed to their fallen comrade. They lifted her carefully, alarm written across their faces. The injuries she sustained were catastrophic, far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Daniel's final strike had left her hovering on the edge of collapse. Leica stood frozen, disbelief evident in her eyes. She had never imagined Lura would be overwhelmed so completely. Not far from her, Zeke observed in silence. Something felt off. The difference in skill between the two fighters had not appeared so vast at the beginning, yet throughout the fight, the girl's ether flow had fluctuated erratically. It had wavered at critical moments, as though destabilized from within. That instability had shaped the outcome. Even the judge's conduct seemed questionable. The count had felt abrupt, almost deliberately shortened. The entire situation left Zeke with a lingering suspicion that something behind the scenes had influenced the result. His blonde teammate muttered in disbelief that Elora of the Sonar family had been rendered utterly defenseless. Still, he admitted that a candidate for the next boss would naturally operate on an entirely different level. A blue-haired girl, visibly shaken, said the brutality of the fight had gone too far. The orange-haired girl tried to reason through it. It was her first time witnessing a powerhouse from another wing fight. Seriously, perhaps this was simply the standard at that level. She could not judge fairly. Rocky, however, grinned with excitement if they were discussing candidates for the next boss. He said then Leica and Zeke belonged in that category, and now Venaniel clearly did as well. The others nodded, replaying the overwhelming display in their minds. Amid their conversation, they noticed Rangus standing unusually stiff. When asked if something was wrong, he hesitated before speaking. He admitted Venaniel had been incredible, but added that everyone in the West Wing seemed overwhelmingly strong. His voice carried clear self-doubt. He apologized for sounding weak even before the final had begun. His lack of confidence drew irritation from a few teammates. With the decisive match approaching, uncertainty only made the atmosphere heavier. The orange-haired girl sighed softly. She confessed that he wasn't entirely wrong. She had lost her previous match, and it frustrated her deeply. No matter how she thought about it, she couldn't deny the gap between herself and the West Wing fighters. Rocky's eyes sharpened. If they were being honest, he said, then he hadn't beaten them either. Even with fewer stars, they had been stronger, but that didn't mean he intended to accept defeat. They had overcome stronger opponents before they could do it again. That belief was enough. His conviction spread quickly. The others straightened, their spirits lifting as determination replaced hesitation. Zeke watched them quietly, a faint sense of pride stirring within him. Their courage, their refusal to crumble under pressure, it pleased him. Rick and Aaron even seemed to murmur small prayers, hoping to grow stronger before the final began. Yet Zeke knew the true issue lay elsewhere. His gaze shifted toward Laika. She looked far more troubled than the others. It seemed she had interpreted the previous fight purely as proof of Vananiel's overwhelming power. If she had not noticed the irregularity in Elwara's ether flow, then her tension made sense. Still, Zeke himself lacked certainty. Without understanding the full truth, he could not offer advice lightly. He remained unsure of how to approach her. Rangus, too, noticed her unease and gently asked if she was all right. Laika gave a small nod. She thanked him and said she simply needed time to sort out her thoughts. After excusing herself, she left the group. Rangus watched her retreating figure, anxiety tightening his chest. Elsewhere, Laika sat alone at the edge of a circular stone fountain. Her shoulders slumped slightly as she stared at the rippling water. She struggled to accept what she had witnessed. Vanal had defeated Laura with overwhelming dominance without sustaining meaningful damage. Even Edgis, at his best, would not have crushed Elra so effortlessly. Yet Vingel had done exactly that. She lowered her fingers into the cool water, lost in thought. The last time she had faced him, she had been only 5 years old. Back then, she had drawn out barely 10% of her strength and still lost. Since that day, she had trained relentlessly, driven by the desire to surpass him. She had believed she had finally closed the gap. Now she wasn't so sure. Based on the match order, Vananiel's likely next opponent would be Zeke. A faint sense of relief flickered inside her at the thought that she might not have to face him herself. She hated that feeling. To her, relief was indistinguishable from surrender. Her hand clenched into a tight fist. No, she would defeat him, no matter what. After some time passed, footsteps approached. Vananiel arrived at the fountain accompanied by one of his subordinates. Vanel soon noticed Laika seated alone by the fountain's edge. A faint mocking curve lifted his lips as he approached her. He tilted his head slightly, asking why she looked so serious. Laika raised her eyes slowly. The look she gave him was sharp enough to cut. She asked what he wanted and made it clear she had no interest in speaking with him. He chuckled lightly, telling her not to be so distant. In a tone laced with arrogance, he remarked that if he became the next boss, perhaps she would end up as his wife. The provocation was deliberate. Laika rose abruptly, fury blazing across her face. She ordered him to shut his mouth and declared that she would be the one to take the position of boss. Vananiel did not move. His posture remained relaxed, almost lazy. He pointed out that she had already doubted her own chances. It was no surprise, he added, that she had never managed to defeat him. Not in the past, and certainly not now. The match that had just concluded only proved the gap between them. Laika refused to hear another word. She turned and began to walk away. His grin deepened. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, stopping her in place. He leaned closer, voice lowering as he insisted she knew she could not win. When she angrily told him to stop talking, his expression hardened, his grip tightened, and he pressed her to admit the truth that she had never beaten him and never would, if she simply accepted it and submitted. He said he might even treat her well. That was the final spark. Laika forcefully shrugged off his hand and shouted at him to quit his nonsense. Without sparing him another glance, she stormed away, her steps sharp with anger. Faniel watched her retreating figure. For a moment, irritation flickered across his face. He muttered under his breath that she was not charming at all. Still, in his mind, everything had already been arranged. The outcome was practically decided. His subordinate stepped forward, calmly asking what they intended to do about Zeke. The Naniel answered casually that Zeke would not pose a problem even during the match itself, but she did not share his ease. She reminded him that regardless of what they thought of Zeke, he had defeated Edgis. It would be wiser to move first, rather than wait. Vananiel considered her words. Acting beforehand would certainly be safer. Yet he noted that Zeke possessed unusually keen instincts. If he sensed anything unusual, it could complicate matters. Besides, from what he had observed, Zeke had seemed to accept certain attacks deliberately. Because of that, Vananiel believed he could likely withstand what was planned, even mid-battle. His subordinate nodded, accepting the reasoning. Vananiel's confidence remained unshaken. The fact that Zeke had beaten Edgis did not intimidate him. If anything, it reinforced his belief that he could not possibly lose. Standing beside the fountain, he extended his hand over the water's surface. From his palm, a faint toxic essence seeped outward, dissolving silently violently into the clear pool. The contamination spread without color or scent, blending seamlessly until no trace remained. He withdrew his hand. In his mind, the conclusion was simple. This fight would belong to them. Rick was tense as he clenched his fist and declared that it had finally arrived. The girl, equally nervous and shaken, looked at Rick with visible anxiety, gritted his teeth, and thought about their situation, realizing that although they were the senior students among the East Wing representatives, they were the weakest. In contrast, the West Wing was clearly filled with elites. The thought weighed heavily on him, and he struggled internally as doubt consumed his mind. Overwhelmed by these thoughts, Rick's voice trembled as he anxiously wondered if they could win. The fear kept building inside him, and he became extremely nervous. At that very moment, Zeke suddenly approached and struck Rick hard on the head. A bump instantly formed on Rick's head from the impact. Zeke then confronted him, demanding to know what had happened to the energy he had shown just a moment ago. Rick hesitated, stammering as he tried to respond, unable to properly explain himself. Seeing this, Zeke shifted his attention and pointed directly at Rick, questioning the purpose of fighting and whether it was to lose. Rick firmly responded that it was not. Zeke reminded him that when one fights, it must always be with the intention of winning. Regardless of any difference in skills, he emphasized that this mindset was what truly mattered. Hearing these words, Rick felt motivation rising from within. Confidence slowly replaced his fear, and he declared with determination that they would win. Zeke, pleased with his response, placed a hand on Rick's shoulder and smiled, praising him for training very well and encouraging him to maintain his confidence. Feeling both confident and slightly amused, Rick respectfully thanked him. Zeke then decided to offer a small but important tip. He advised Rick to relax his shoulders more. Confused, Rick sought clarity. Zeke carefully explained that the high-strength fist technique concentrates all force onto a single point of impact. If too much effort is applied in the wrong way, the force that should be concentrated becomes dispersed. To demonstrate, Zeke placed both hands on Rick's shoulders and encouraged him to relax. Following the guidance, Rick felt a renewed surge of confidence. He expressed that he now felt capable of winning and sincerely thanked Zeke, praising his relaxation technique as the best. Zeke felt proud upon hearing this. With firm confidence and satisfaction, he encouraged Rick to go forward and win. After being motivated by Zeke, Rick headed toward the duel like a happy kitten, cheerfully chanting that they would definitely win. His earlier fear had completely transformed into excitement and determination as he walked away with renewed confidence. Zeke watched him from behind, observing his energetic stride. Leah broke the silence, remarking that something felt curious. Zeke calmly asked what she found so curious. She pointed out that he had not learned the great force fist technique, yet he seemed to understand it very well. She added that sometimes he appeared to know a great deal about other martial arts, too. She questioned the reason behind it and admitted that it felt strange. Zeke responded with a calm smile, assuring her that it was not a silly question at all. His tone suggested that there was indeed something more. However, his expression soon turned serious as he continued. Hearing his words, Leah's eyes widened in shock. Then, suddenly shifting back to a smile, Zeke pointed at himself and declared that the reason was simply because it was him. His confident and playful response broke the tension instantly. Leah, now clearly annoyed, remarked that she had been foolish to ask him such a serious question in the first place. Meanwhile, Rick stood confidently before his opponent. As he stared ahead, he thought about the incredible fighter he had witnessed in the first battle. The memory remained vivid in his mind. However, this time, his resolve was firm. He strengthened his determination and vowed within himself that he would not lose again. Rick's opponent stood before him with a cold and arrogant attitude. With a dismissive scoff, he mocked Rick, declaring that a nobody who had lost to the North Wing had no right to wear such an arrogant expression. His pride was evident in his posture and tone. In response, Rick answered with equal arrogance, carrying himself like an alpha male. He boldly declared that he was no longer the same person as before. His opponent reacted with a dirty grin spreading across his face, doubting that Rick had truly changed at all. At that very moment, the examiner formally announced the beginning of the first match between the East Wing and the West Wing. The atmosphere in the arena tightened as the signal to start echoed through the battleground. The instant the match began, Rick's opponent drew his dagger dagger and charged forward at full speed to attack. As he rushed in, he shouted that Rick should stop talking nonsense and accept reality. He insisted that no one could change within just a few hours. He taunted Rick further, reminding him that only minutes ago he had been nothing more than a weak loser, mouse pretending to act like a tiger. The sudden burst of speed and aggression shocked Rick. His eyes widened as he witnessed the ferocity of the incoming attack. His opponent lunged forward mid-air with an intense shouting expression. He held short blades in both hands, and bright green, wind-like energy spiraled around him in a powerful aura. The energy formed sharp, curved streaks that emphasized overwhelming speed and destructive force, making it clear that he was unleashing a special attack. Rick's opponent executed the combat insect dagger technique, specifically the devastating mantis cut. The technique sliced through the air with tremendous pressure. Faced with such a powerful strike, Rick barely managed to block it by crossing both of his hands together in front of him. Even though he succeeded in defending himself, the force of the impact sent him flying far across the arena. He crashed to the ground at a distance. Yet, despite the blow, he still managed to stand back up. Seeing Rick recover angered his opponent. Jealousy and rage burned in his eyes. Consumed by fury, he gripped both daggers again and dashed toward Rick at the speed of light for another assault. This time he unleashed an even more terrifying technique known as Total Devour of the Lobster. The sheer power of this strike left everyone watching in complete shock. The audience was stunned by the overwhelming energy radiating from the attack. Rick could barely defend himself and was forced to block the strike with his bare hands. His opponent began laughing mockingly, ridiculing Rick's condition and questioning what had gone wrong with him. He sarcastically reminded Rick that he was supposed to have changed. Rick continued to groan while gritting his teeth, feeling the immense strength behind those attacks. In his mind, he admitted that the power was overwhelming. However, even as pain surged through his body, he refused to surrender. He resolved that he could not allow himself to be crushed unilaterally. With determination burning in his heart, he promised himself and his head that this time, no matter what happened, he would definitely win. Despite his injuries, Rick forced himself to move, gathering all his remaining speed, energy, and power. He began launching a relentless barrage of punches toward his opponent. Each strike carried desperation and determination. However, his opponent effortlessly dodged every single punch with smooth footwork and superior agility. While evading, he mockingly called Rick a fool and declared that such attacks would never reach him. In the next instant, the opponent slipped behind Rick and stabbed him in the back with a dagger. Blood spilled from the wound, staining his clothes. Rick gritted his teeth and groaned in pain as the sharp sensation shot through his body. Even while suffering, Zeke's earlier words echoed clearly in his mind. He realized that if he continued fighting like this, he would never be able to reach his opponent. Confusion filled his thoughts as he wondered what he should do. Then the memory continued to replay in his head. He remembered the encouragement to move forward. He recalled the instruction to relax a little. He remembered the explanation that the powerful fist technique concentrates all force onto a single point of impact. Breathing heavily, Rick wiped the blood from his mouth. His eyes hardened with resolve. He understood that this was an all-or-nothing moment. It had become a true situation of do or die. Meanwhile, his opponent once again prepared to finish the fight. Holding two daggers firmly in both hands, he positioned himself for another decisive strike. This time, Rick did not panic. He steadied his stance and prepared himself to block the incoming attack. His opponent screamed as he charged forward aggressively. In that instant, he unleashed another technique known as the flash of the stinging bee. But this time, Rick did not feel fear when facing the attack. Instead of widening his eyes in shock, he formed a confident grin. With unwavering determination, he declared that he had finally caught him. Seeing Rick's sudden change, his opponent became furious. He gritted his teeth in anger and, unable to understand what was happening, demanded to know what Rick was doing. Rage and disbelief were clearly written across his face. In that decisive moment, Rick clenched his fist tightly. A powerful yellow aura began to surge from his hand, radiating intense energy. Without hesitation, he grabbed the incoming blade with his bare hand. The sharp edge dug into his palm, yet he refused to let go. His grip was firm, unshakable, and filled with resolve. With a loud scream fueled by determination, Rick declared that it was now time for his Great Strength Fist technique. He invoked the name of the Great Strength Fist as his energy intensified. Instantly, a fiery aura burst from his fist, blazing with overwhelming power. The flames of energy wrapped around his arm as he drove his punch forward with incredible force. Rick then delivered a devastating blow to his opponent. The impact was so harsh and powerful that his opponent was sent flying across the arena. He crashed violently into the wall, shattering parts of it upon collision. Debris scattered everywhere as a massive explosion echoed throughout the battleground. All the students watching were left completely stunned. Shock spread across their faces as they struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Leah and Zeke, observing from a distance, felt immense happiness seeing Rick's performance. Zeke in particular felt an overwhelming sense of pride. As the dust slowly settled and silence filled the arena, the examiner stepped forward and declared that the match was over. He formally announced that the winner was the East Wing. Moments after the announcement, the scene shifted toward Rick's defeated opponent. He was slumped helplessly against a cracked wall. The surface behind him had shattered outward in a deep crater-like pattern, clearly showing that he had been violently thrown into it. Seeing this devastating result, Rick stood frozen in shock. For a brief moment, he could not believe what he was witnessing. He struggled to accept that he had truly won the fight. The realization slowly sank in, and disbelief transformed into overwhelming joy. Excitement burst out of him as he raised his hand high into the air and began cheering in celebration. However, the moment did not end there. Rick's defeated opponent suddenly opened his eyes. Shock filled his expression as he tried to process what had happened. He could not comprehend that he had lost, especially not to someone he had considered weak. Elsewhere in the arena, Venal sat upon his throne like a king observing his domain. His presence carried authority and dominance. With a simple gesture, he summoned the defeated fighter to come closer. The injured opponent dragged himself forward and knelt down in front of Venal's feet. Trembling and ashamed, he apologized sincerely. Venal's expression darkened ominously as he looked down at him. Without mercy, Venal delivered a powerful punch that sent the man flying once again, crashing onto the ground at a distance. After striking down the defeated fighter, Venal slowly turned his attention toward the rest of his subordinates. Holding his dagger firmly in hand, he cast a deadly glare at them. His eyes carried a clear warning as he reminded them that they already knew what would happen if they lost. The threat in his presence alone was enough to send chills through the air. Hearing those words, his subordinates were overwhelmed with fear. Their bodies stiffened, and anxiety spread across their faces. In unison, they shouted loudly that they understood him. Their voices trembled, revealing just how terrified they were of failing. On the other side of the arena, the atmosphere was completely different. Rick, still filled with adrenaline from his victory, turned toward his teammate, Marin, with urgency and encouragement. He told her to try her hardest. He assured her that she could do it and reminded her that she needed to win. Marin responded by clenching her fist tightly. Confidence shone in her eyes as she declared that she could do it and that she would definitely win. Her determination was firm and unwavering. Her opponent, however, watched her silently with cold and calculating eyes. There was no visible emotion on his face, only focus and readiness. At that moment, the examiner formally announced the beginning of the second fight. The tension in the arena immediately intensified as both fighters stepped forward. Marin and her opponent stood face to face. Without hesitation, Marin rushed forward with intense power, gripping her sword tightly. Her movements were sharp and fearless. Opposite her, her red-haired opponent stood prepared in a solid defensive stance, holding a spear with precision. With fierce determination, Marin gathered her full power and launched an aggressive attack at her opponent using her sword. She screamed as she activated her sword technique of red fire, unleashing the devastating spark cut. Her expression turned sharp and fearless as fiery energy surrounded her blade. The sword glowed bright yellow, oran, flames spiraling around it as she propelled herself forward through the air with explosive speed. Meanwhile, the red-haired fighter steadied himself. Holding his spear firmly, he took a defensive stance. The burning arc of Marin's attack tore through the air toward him, signaling an imminent and powerful clash. In response, the red-haired spear user suddenly stepped forward with aggression. He swung his spear in a wide, sweeping arc. A brilliant blue crescent-shaped energy wave formed around the spear's blade and sliced through the air toward Marin. Despite her momentum, Marin was struck slightly by the spear's force. She groaned as pain shot through her body. However, her opponent did not hesitate. Seizing control of the fight, he activated the great chaos spear technique known as Chatiko Blow Berini. With ruthless precision, he thrust the spear forward and struck Marin hard in the stomach. The blow sent her flying backward. She crashed onto the ground at a distance, groaning in agony. Blood spread from her mouth as she coughed painfully, her strength rapidly fading. Seeing this opportunity, her opponent moved in without mercy. He raised his spear and brought it down toward her head. Blood splattered from the impact. Rangus, trembling with shock, questioned how things could have escalated so far. Marin's remaining teammates, including Leah, were overwhelmed with fear as they witnessed the brutal scene. Shock spread across their faces, and anxiety gripped their hearts. Leah, however, was not only frightened, but also furious, because there was no rule that justified such excessive violence. The blue-haired girl nearby trembled and admitted that she could not continue watching any longer. Leah's anger intensified as she fixed her eyes on Marin's opponent, feeling that he had gone far beyond what was acceptable. Rick, deeply worried for Marin, tried to rush toward her side. His body moved instinctively, driven by concern and desperation. However, a blonde-haired teammate quickly grabbed him and held him back. He warned Rick that he could not interfere because the match had not yet been officially declared over. He reminded him that if he acted now, it would result in a forfeit. Before the tension could escalate further, the examiner's voice rang out across the arena, formally announcing that the match was over. He declared the winner to be the West Wing. As the announcement settled, the cruel image became even clearer. The West Wing fighter stood proudly with his foot placed on top of Marin's head. She lay almost completely knocked down on the ground, her body limp and battered. Blood flowed from her mouth, nose, and head, staining the floor beneath her. Unable to hold back any longer, Rick rushed forward once the match was officially ended. He knelt beside Marin and gently lifted her into his arms, trying desperately to help her up. His face was filled with panic and guilt. Leah hurried to her side as well, her expression tense and shaken. She repeatedly called out to Marin, asking if she was okay and begging her to wake up. Throughout all of this, Zeke stood silently at a distance. He observed everything with a steady, unreadable expression.